Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome everyone to City Hall Council Chambers for tonight's public hearing, March the 24th, 2015. We have quorum of council, so I will call this meeting to order and ask the clerk for roll call, please.
Mayor Robertson's in the chair. Councillor Louis. Councillor Stevenson. Here. Councillor Deal. Here. Councillor Jang. Here. Councillor Reimer. Councillor Meggs. Here. Councillor Ball. Councillor Carr, Councillor Affleck, and Councillor DeGenova. Mr. Mayor, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. And again, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us here in Council Chambers and those of you who are tuned in online. Tonight, our public hearing has 3 items on the agenda. And just to give folks a sense of how that will go, the first item at this point has no speakers registered to it. The second has 1 speaker registered, and the third item, which is the text amendment, proposed amendments to the Downtown Official Development Plan, at this point has 25 speakers registered for that. And as is our practice, we will endeavor to hear from all speakers who are here tonight. We have scheduled time until 10 p.m. and it'll be up to council how we proceed with discussions, debate, and decisions on the items following hearing from speakers. If possible, there is a backup night on Thursday night, again starting at 6 o'clock here if we don't get through these items, these agenda items. But we will, I think given the number of speakers, there's a decent possibility of hearing from everyone tonight without going overtime or going to Thursday, but that will depend on the pace of things as we hear from speakers and hear the presentations from staff and have questions from council. So we need to start in on the agenda. We need to have a motion to go into committee of the whole. Councillor Stevenson moves, and a seconder. Councillor Deal, all those in favor? Any opposed? And that carries. So I'll just give some brief announcements for everyone who's here to speak. The guidelines around speaking. Speakers have 5 minutes to make their comments and should limit their comments to the merits of the report that's being considered by council. And we ask that speakers also state whether they are in support or opposed to the recommendations in these reports that are being considered. Speakers may speak once for up to 5 minutes. You don't have to use all of your 5 minutes. If you have more to share, you can put that in writing, either a hard copy for the clerks after you've made your 5-minute statement. You can also send it by email to mayorandcouncil@vancouver.ca. And you may have questions from council following your comments as well. Councillors have the opportunity to ask you questions. You are not obligated to answer the questions that council poses of you. That is your discretion. We also have a provision for more time. If you're representing 3 more people or 3 more organizations, you get 3 more minutes of speaking time. And we just ask that the persons or organizations that you're representing identify themselves and they're not speakers themselves. So those are the general guidelines. There is a little clock. We've finally moved the little clock screen right next to the microphone there on the podium that will show the time that you have speaking time, and I will give you a nudge when you are approaching your 5-minute mark. And that's about all on the details for speaking, those of you who are here to speak. And we will jump in now with our first item, which is the rezoning for 126, 136, 146, 156, 166, and 168 East 35th Avenue. And just a note that Councillor DeGenova had declared a conflict of interest on this item at the regular council meeting where we referred this March the 3rd, 2015. We referred this to public hearing. So she will not be weighing in on this item. Councillor DeGenova, you want to just confirm that while
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. And the same applies to item number 2, as both are very close to my personal residence. So I will be leaving the room now. Then.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll ask Madam Clerk to read the application on item number 1 and the summary of correspondence received.
Yes, this is an application by Ramsey Warden Architects Limited on behalf of Mosaic East 35th Holdings Limited to rezone 126, 136, 146, 156, 166, and 168 East 35th Avenue from RS1 to CD1 district to permit the development of a 6-story residential building with 48 dwelling units. A height of 20.7 meters and floor space ratio of 2.3 are proposed. The General Manager of Planning and Development Services recommends approval, subject to the conditions as set out in the summary and recommendation of the public hearing agenda. And no correspondence has been received on this application since it was scheduled for public hearing.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. And we have Graham Winterbottom here, a planner from our Vancouver South Division, to present the application. We don't have registered speakers, so I might suggest we waive the presentation and okay, and we can go to questions. I'll just ask if there is any comments from the applicant team who wish to speak to the application. No comments on the front end, so we'll go right to questions for staff, Mr. Winterbottom, or the applicant team. Does anyone have a question for staff or the applicants? No questions from council, so I will call for any speakers to this item. Our practice is to call 3 times. Are there any speakers here for item number 1? Does anyone here wish to speak to item number 1? Last call. Any speakers here for item number 1? Seeing none, we will go to closing comments from staff. Anything, Mr. Winterbottom?
No, thanks.
Okay, thank you. And applicants, any comments, closing comments? All right, any questions from council? Final questions? Councillor Louis moves adoption of the recommendations. Thank you. Any further debate from council on that? This one is straightforward. And we will go to the voting queue on this then. And I'll ask council to vote on the recommendations in item number 1. Just waiting for the technology to catch up to us here. And I have Councillor Meggs, Councillor Stevenson. Okay, we have 10 votes and all are in favor. Okay. Okay, we have completed item number 1, unanimous support for the recommendations in item number 1. Thanks to applicants and staff team for bringing that forward. And we are on to item number 2. That is the rezoning for 5037, 5067, and 5087 Main Street. Again, Councillor DeGenova declared a conflict on this item as well. I'll ask the clerks to please read the application and the summary of the correspondence we've received.
This is an application by Taylor Kurtz Architecture and Design Incorporated on behalf of BOFFO Homes Main Street Incorporated to rezone 5037, 5067, and 5087 Main Street from RM3A Multiple Dwelling District to CD1 Comprehensive Development District to permit the development of a 5-story residential building with 41 dwelling units, including 8 replacement market rental housing units. A height of 18.9 meters and floor space ratio of 2.53 are proposed. The General Manager of Planning and Development Services recommends approval, subject to the conditions as set out in the summary and recommendation of the public hearing agenda. And no correspondence has been received on this application since it was referred to public hearing.
Okay, thank you, Madam Clerk. And we have, again, Graham Winterbottom is here, our planner from Vancouver South Division. We have one speaker registered on this item. Okay, we'll waive presentation.
Yep, certainly we'd be willing to waive it.
Bottom's available for questions, and I'll ask if the applicant team wanted any opening comments. Okay, no thanks. We're good on opening comments. So any questions from council? I have Councillor Carr. Questions for staff or the applicant team?
Yes, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for being here to answer the questions. At referral, I actually asked a question that I was hoping to get an answer from you at this point, and that has to do with the evaluation of the community amenity contributions. The report states that the staff consider the $565,000 in community amenity contributions as appropriate, and I'm wondering if you could explain further what that appropriateness would be based on.
Sure. So as in the report, the applicant is offering a cash CAC of $565,000 to contribute to public benefits in the area. So in determining that this is appropriate, staff has used standard and well-established evaluation criteria in the development performer review. Also, this allocation will go towards Affordable Housing Reserve Fund to achieve affordable housing projects within the area as per the Little Mountain Adjacent Area rezoning policy.
Okay. Can you perhaps elaborate a little more specifically that we do target sometimes 75% or so of the increased value of the property due to the increased density as an appropriate return. Is that what it's about in this project, or how have we determined that?
So to answer that, I'll defer to Brian Sears from our real estate department.
Thank you. Thank you.
So yes, in this case, it is 75% of the estimated increase in the land value. And it's the increase in land value that gives people the ability to pay community amenity contributions.
Right. Thank you. That's the information I was seeking.
Okay, that's all for questions to staff and the applicant team. So we will go to hearing from our speaker, registered speaker, and that is Ned Jacobs. Welcome, Mr. Jacobs.
Thank you. I believe this was mailed to you by our committee chair, that's RPSC Visions, today, so you should have received it. But I will read it to you. Just preface it with that the Little Mountain redevelopment is the gift that keeps on taking away the homes of low-income residents and driving them out of the community in which they've tried to set roots. We are writing to request that you not approve this proposed rezoning on account of the tenant relocation assistance plan, which in our view is inadequate and unacceptable. The staff report states that the average current monthly rent for a two-bedroom apartment in the existing buildings is $1,102, and the average rent for an equivalent apartment in the area is $1,318, a difference of $216. Terms of relocation offered by the proponent would require that the existing tenants be provided with 3 location options, at least one of which must be in the area. All 3 options must be at rates not more than 10% greater than the area average. According to this formula, all 3 options for a two-bedroom apartment could rent for as much as $1,457. That amounts to an average rent increase of $355 per month. At that rate, the 2 months free rent on offer would be consumed in about 6 months, after which the tenants would be stuck with a huge increase that would likely soon be further inflated as statutory annual increases of 2% plus rate of inflation were applied. In all probability, rent increases of this magnitude would impose severe financial hardship on the existing tenants. Indeed, it may not be possible for some or all of them to pay these high rental rates. Under this plan, they could be forced to leave the area, forced to leave Vancouver, or forced into homelessness. We hope that you agree with us that such outcomes are not acceptable, especially as a consequence of a project that stands to make a handsome profit for the proponent, including 10% more density than the 2.30 allowed for in the rezoning policy, and will provide a cash community amenity contribution for the City of Vancouver. We therefore request that the relocation plan be revised to strike the reference to 10% above and instead require that quote, all options provided would rent for no more than the average rent for the area unless otherwise agreed to by the tenant. This change would cost the proponent little, if anything, as it would not require additional cash outlays for tenant compensation. It is a very modest request, probably too modest, certainly too modest, since even average rates could increase their current rents by more than $200, which may be beyond the ability of some to absorb. The report recommends a CAC of $565,000 to be allocated to the Affordable Housing Reserve Fund to advance housing objectives either on the Little Mountain site or within the Riley Park South Canby area. Indeed, we have been informed by city staff that they have been negotiating the acquisition of a parcel on the Little Mountain housing site for about 90 social housing units, additional to the 234 units to be provided by BC Housing as replacements for the 224 units that were vacated starting in 2007 and demolished starting in 2009. CACs from this and other rezonings in the quadrangle adjacent to Little Mountain will fund these additional units, which presumably will be owned by the city. We therefore further request that the tenants displaced by this rezoning be given first right of refusal for these social housing units when they become available, either at rates equivalent to what they would pay if they had not been forced to leave their present homes, or at 30% of household income. If the social housing units funded by these CACs are built on a different site in the Riley Park area, then the same offer should stand. This option should not replace, but be additional to the option to rent at market rates minus 20% offered by the proponent in their project. Again, our requests are entirely reasonable, and the very least that a city administration that values compassion and community should countenance. Ensuring long-term relocation at rates no greater than the average, short-term relocation that is, and a genuinely affordable long-term option would provide a measure of financial relief and hope for these tenants that they might be able to remain in the area or return in due course. Mayor Robertson, provided you and your colleagues on Vancouver City Council and the proponent are willing to respond positively to our modest, sensible proposals, we will gladly drop our objections to this rezoning. Sincerely, Alan Bume, Chair, Riley Park South Canby Community Visions Implementation Committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jacobs. And you have questions from Councillor Carr.
Being here as you have on many occasions, and for all your community work and the work of your resident organization as well. I have several questions. One, my understanding from the letter that you read is that there's a very big concern with the interim housing solution, that it's not affordable for the people there.
That's correct.
And I'd like to know what your feelings are about the longer term offer, the first right of refusal to relocate back into a replacement unit at 20% discount off the proposed initial starting rents.
Yeah, I don't have those figures of the proposed starting rent, but it would be even more expensive. I can assure you that that would be more expensive even than 10% above the average. It would be certainly more than 10% above the average rental rate for the area. So it's not a viable option, right. Probably for any of these tenants. It's lip service, I think.
Okay.
I mean, unless they're all multimillionaires living in the lowest cost housing they could find, who happen to be misers, and I'm sure that this is not the case. I can tell you it is definitely not the case.
I can certainly ask staff about the proposed starting rents and what that would mean in terms of the actual average rent now, and whether 20%, how the 20% less than the proposed starting rents would compare to the current rents now.
I think that's a question for housing staff, not for me.
No, exactly.
I haven't done the
I said I
calculations on that.
I
just know that they're so out to lunch, and that, that they're not viable. So, yeah.
The rents.
Yeah, it's not a viable.
I just wanted to confirm. Okay.
I mean, staff may have some other figures.
Staff are wonderful. So my second question has to do with the overall proposal. And if it were not for the tenant relocation package, would you and the Riley Park South Canby Community Vision Implementation Committee be satisfied with the overall proposal?
Well, I was reading very fast, but at the end I said, and I'm only speaking for the committee here, not
Yes.
for myself.
Yes.
Provided you and your colleagues on Vancouver City Council and the proponent are willing to respond positively to our proposals regarding the rental assistance, we will
Right.
gladly drop our objections to this rezoning.
Okay. I wasn't
So
sure.
those are our only objections to the rezoning. That's all. That's all I am here to.
That's the clarification I was seeking.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. I will ask staff at the end of the period. We can ask questions about the possibilities of making any changes to the tenant relocation plan.
Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks for being here.
Okay. Second speaker just registered as Nicholas Chernin. And welcome.
Thank you.
Right on to your right there, yeah.
Right, new clock. Thanks for having this public hearing this evening. My name is Nicholas Chernin, lifetime resident of Vancouver, primarily in the Oak Ridge neighborhood, but grew up spending a lot of my time in the Riley Park and Little Mountain neighborhood as well. I don't have a prepared speech for tonight because the last 2 weeks I spent with my kids on spring break. But I was encouraged to come here tonight because of the letter sent to you all yesterday from Alan Bume, who was my social studies teacher in high school at Churchill, and had a big impact on me and how I see the world and how I want to participate. And really, I'm here to ask you to pay close attention to the letter that was sent to you from that Riley Park Steering Committee, because I truly think it holds some very modest requests. We were all here a couple of weeks ago in regards to the Marine Gardens project, and we've got a lot of people displaced, or that will be displaced from that neighborhood, just as a few residents will be displaced from this project or these homes as they are right now as well. And I think the discussion really is about, if we're trying to create healthy neighborhoods and encourage affordability, a big part of that is to allow people to stay in the neighborhoods that they currently live in. And I believe what the Riley Park Steering Committee is suggesting to you are just some very, very modest suggestions to you that might give the current residents an opportunity to stay in the neighborhood. The first right of refusal given to the current residents for whatever affordable housing units are built down the road in the neighborhood, I think is an absolutely reasonable request. A question that I would ask you to consider is that I'm curious why in this actual report that is come before you today has a specific suggestion that CAC money, and right now it's only tied to affordable housing, is specific to this neighborhood. And a couple of weeks ago when we were here in talking about Marine Gardens, when that request was, and an amendment was put to have the CAC money generated off that project, the request was turned down, and it wasn't suggested that that made sense for CAC money to stay in the South Vancouver, Marpole, Lower South Cambry corridor. And so the inconsistency of applying the actual CAC policy that was last amended in 2014, point one, the process for determining specific amenities, CACs, number one, located in the community in which the rezoning takes place and or serves the site. And so I think there should be some discussion about the inconsistencies of where CAC money is collected and where it is utilized. So again, I think the Riley Park Steering Committee is reasonably requesting and to work with the city to make sure that that $565,000 is spent in the area. I would like to see in this report, I think it's probably too late, but in future reports, very specific CAC calculations. I mean, we had a response from the city as to how the CACs are calculated. I think as a resident, and then there's a lot of me, people like me, that can actually handle the numbers and get specifics of how your development cost levy numbers are calculated, as well as your community amenity calculations are calculated. And before approving this, I'd like to see exactly how those dollars are arrived at. Just coming up with, yes, it was 75% of land levy. That's not good enough. I think we deserve to know exactly how they're calculated, particularly in areas of negotiated numbers. And that's all I was able to think off the top of my head. So thank you.
Thank you. And you've got questions from Councillor Carr.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thanks so much for being here, Mr. Turnan. I just have one question, and that is in the actual plan, in the report itself, it actually states very clearly that the CACs should be spent to achieve the council's social housing objectives, either on the Little Mountain site or in Riley Park, South Canby. So is that to your satisfaction? You raised a concern about the spending. Is that what the wording you'd like to see?
Yeah, I'm okay with that. And I guess my concern was coming out of the inconsistency of how it gets applied in one application that comes before you compared to others. So I was taking the opportunity to.
I think you were here when I raised issues at the other one, but okay. I will ask staff at the end as to whether or not, as apropos of your second, if I get your second question correctly, is it possible to reuse that CAC directly in terms of support for example, the current tenants in this location? Is that right?
Yes.
Right. I'll ask that question.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks.
Questions from Councillor Ball?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Turnan. Thanks for coming in. Just to confirm, because I just got a chance to read Mr. Bume's full letter. Somehow I hadn't got the whole letter. And just to confirm what you're saying here, you're asking us to not approve it based on, could you give me the specific, because there are several ideas here, but not a specific objection.
Because the letter was only sent yesterday, and like you, I'm looking at it just within the last couple of hours, actually. I'm going to stick with what they have put together in this letter, and I don't know how else to modify it without maybe taking away from the work that they've put into it. You know, and one of the concerns I have is, you know, this letter received from probably one of the most influential groups in the particular neighborhood, and our director of planning walks out of the room while this letter is being read to council. That concerns me, and you know, we need to listen.
Mr. Turnan, I just caution you at those comments and impugning staff without any validation of that. The council's not aware of that, so. Just caution you on that, that assertion.
So I could be a little clearer.
Sure.
Do you think it's the cost of the actual, the increase in terms of monthly rents that's the main issue in terms of what you're discussing here? I'm just trying to get to not allow housing to go through.
Yeah.
We want to have something that's very specific or you know, really good reason. So I'm just trying to find out whether it's the expectation that there will be no increase in the rent, or what's the most important thing here?
Well, I guess, I mean, I keep hitting this, sorry. I mean, the
I helped draft it.
Okay.
It's here.
Right.
Strike the reference to 10%
okay.
above.
Okay.
And the other thing is that they be allowed first right of refusal on the social housing units produced with the CACs from this area, not just this project.
Right. And I think that sort of is going on, tagging on to the question that Councillor Carr was asking. So not just first right of refusal for what the project that potentially could be built, but in the area, because the idea, as far as I see it, is to encourage residents to stay within the neighborhood that they've become connected to, their children, their family, their friends. And the specific statement here, the request that the relocation plan be revised to strike the reference to 10% above and instead require that all options provided would rent for no more than the average rent of the area. And I think that's really important, the area that this project is taking place in, unless otherwise agreed to by the tenant. I'm also concerned, just as I was with Marine Gardens, and many people were suggesting that there was a healthy relocation package with a large cash option, $5,000 to $10,000. Here we have 2 months free rent. The rent differential as it stands right now between what they're currently paying and what they would have to pay of the larger average will be eaten up in that 2 months free rent very quickly. And so I have a concern with the relocation package as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, that's all of your questions, and thank you for being here to speak tonight. And I'll call if there are any, 3 times, if there are any more speakers here for item number 2. Please, if you could step up, yeah, and give us your name for the record.
Hello, William O'Brien, longtime resident. I'm here, so I just wanted to take less than 5 minutes on the adjacent area rezoning, which I believe this is the 4th, if not the 3rd one. And for some of us who've been working in the area, particularly the Little Mountain policy statement planning process going back 6-7 years, many meetings. As you know, David Vaisboard is making a documentary on that topic, and he's got 700 hours of film. And during one of those things, before even the adjacent area planning process began, we were told that they were going to start the planning process for adjacent area because of the rezoning of Little Mountain. Subsequent questions on 2 occasions, staff reported that no, there would be no rezonings in the adjacent area before the rezoning of Little Mountain. And as we know, Little Mountain is not rezoned. The question begs, and I have not reviewed the tapes of the adjacent area policy statement planning process or the draft minutes, but as I'm here to ask the question, or somebody should ask the question maybe, is there a bump in the road here on these rezonings? Thank you.
Okay, thank you for being here tonight to speak. No questions for you? Okay.
Okay.
All right. Are there any more speakers here for item number 2? And last call, any more speakers here for item number 2? Okay, step right up, please.
My name is Maria Teresa Palomino. Thank you for giving me the opportunity. I was not familiar before entering the room about this subject you were discussing, but my point of view for what I've been hearing in the neighborhood that pertains to this item number 2, I would like just to make a comment. Is the way I view it is very important, I think, for the health of a whole community, of the whole Vancouver and the whole country per se, to maintain the health of young people and their families. When they belong to a community, it makes a lot of distress on especially young people. They become apart from friends, and they are being dismembered of everything they know. And then after that, there are health issues and many other problems that come to that. So I just wanted to point that out to consider all these items. I think that was a very very well exposed situation here. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you for being here and speaking. And last call, are there any more speakers for item number 2? Okay, with that, we will close the speakers list. And as we've had very little correspondence on this, the close the public comments period and go right to closing comments from staff and the applicant team. First, from staff, Mr. Winterbottom, did you have closing comments?
No, not at this time.
And applicant team, did you have any closing comments? Okay, so we'll go to staff for questions. To council. Sorry, I just bumped everyone off there. Councillor Louie.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A couple of questions. Let's start with the rent rates, the current rent rates, considerably below what the average in the area is, about $200 below the average. Maybe just describe to me why you think that is.
Good evening, Council. Abby Bond, Director of Housing Policy and Projects. So I think there was some information provided at referral, but I'll refresh Council's memory about this. So there are currently 5 tenants in this building, 3 of whom came in after the rezoning application was made. And so in conversation with the applicant, they've informed us that those people have moved in after the rezoning application on short fixed-term tenancies, and the rents reflect that, the short-term nature of the tenancies, and also the condition of some of the rooms. The rooms are in need of some upgrading, they're a little tired, and so the rents are reflective of that, and are therefore considerably below what you might see elsewhere in the community. So an average rent in this area is $988 for a 1-bed and $1,318 for a 2-bed elsewhere in the area.
Okay, so it's because of the condition of the units, and in combination there's 3 of the 5 that came in terms of short-term tenancies, knowing that it was a redevelopment proposal was in place or was in process.
And that's why staff have recommended the fact that our usual approach would be to get the applicant through a tenant relocation plan to offer 10% within 10% of someone's existing rent, but we felt in this case we would do that within 10% of the average rents in the area.
Okay. A question in regards to the future social housing that may become available in the area. Describe to me what the tenanting process would normally be, because in this instance, some speakers were advancing the concept that council could fetter that other social housing through this rezoning.
As we've indicated in the report, there are some opportunities to land social housing in this area, which is why the link has been made to the money that's being identified for the Affordable Housing Fund and those opportunities that exist in the Little Mountain adjacent area and Little Mountain itself. That's why we've linked the 2 here. But they would be social housing, so there would be an eligibility issue. For example, we don't know the income information about the tenants in this building. I'm not sure how you would link it from here. I think council would have to put a requirement in the rezoning report for those social housing units in order to require some of those units to be offered to these tenants who are moving out of this building. It could direct staff to link that, but
it's what I'm thinking is that when those units become available, there is a robust screening process, vetting process. There's a criteria to be met, and that in order to be eligible for those for those social housing units, that they would have to go through this process rather than direction of council today on these 5 tenants that are in place.
It's hard to see how we would do that at this point without knowing whether the tenants are eligible in advance of that.
Okay. In regards to the CAC monies, there was some comment about monies collected and where it's applied. In this case, the CAC money is being recommended that it be fully allocated towards the Affordable Housing Fund. Could you just describe to me why that is? Like, why we would put together and assemble this amount of money with other monies for social housing in this way?
It's not always possible to deal with the need of communities on one particular project. So we have targets across the city for social housing, secured market rental, and that we're often opportunity driven, and we collect money from community amenity contributions and DCLs in order to focus those where opportunities come up. And in this particular community, there is an opportunity in the near future, potentially subject to rezoning application at Little Mountain, to potentially land that money and further invest in social housing.
But isn't it true that the majority of community amenity contributions are generated in our more dense areas, our downtown core area, and that if the premise was that wherever it's generated, it should be allocated, it would preclude some fairly significant reallocations to neighborhoods in our city that require community amenities?
Especially with regard to housing, we do need some flexibility about where we land that investment.
Okay, I think.
Okay, that's your time. Councillor Louis?
Staff just want to finish.
Just to offer additional details about the CAC being directed towards the Affordable Housing Fund. So the Little Mountain adjacent area rezoning policy was developed in concert with the Little Mountain policy statement. And that direction for the Affordable Housing Reserve Fund, that was in response to Council's request with the approval of the Little Mountain policy statement to find innovative means and partnerships to achieve the full 20% on the site. So that is in response to Council's direction, either to achieve it on the site to meet that objective, or if it's not needed there in the greater Riley Park area.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Carr is next.
Mayor. Yes, I think Ms. Bond, thank you. My first question has to do with the tenants. At the time of referral, the report indicated that there was one tenant on a fixed term lease. I didn't understand at that time that there are 3 tenants on fixed term lease.
That's right, yeah. There are additional tenants on a fixed term lease.
There are. Okay, if you were to take those tenants lower than average or, you know, fixed term lease rent out, do we have a figure for what the average rent is for the remaining 2 tenants who have been there for some considerable time? Is it lower or higher than the $1,102 a month for the 2 bedrooms?
Do you have that information?
I just direct you to Appendix E, where it lists the monthly rents of the tenants. So they're all all around $1,100.
They're all around. So it's the same whether they were fixed term or not fixed term. Okay, that's information that I was wanting. Is it possible to work with the proponent in terms of this proposal and on the tenant relocation plan? And alter it. I mean, I'm familiar with other proposals that have come forward to us where the tenant relocation plan, for example, has in it that at least one of the 3 options that would be offered on an interim basis to tenants would be at the same rent as they currently have. And I'm also familiar with other proposals in which we say the tenants can come back in at the same, starting at the same rent as they currently had. Now, is that feasible? And maybe I should be asking the proponent this, but
yeah, that might be a good question to address to the applicant. I would say that in this situation, if council wanted to amend the tenant relocation plan,
yes,
you could do that to direct staff to, or to direct the applicant to provide a different number of options with a benchmark of a different rent. So that could be benchmarked to the area rent or within a certain percentage of their existing rent, as we have done in other relocation plans. The impact of that might be less than requiring those tenants to come back on the same rents that they're currently on, but I would defer to the applicant for the exact.
I will ask that, but I just want to be clear. We're talking about 5 current tenants as opposed to a proposal that would have 41 units. So it's some, 10% or something like that, a little more than of the units. Okay. Just while I still have you, though, at the stand, Ms. Abbey. In terms of the CACs being used, there was a discussion that happened with Councillor Louie about the use of the CACs. I want to clarify, did you say that a portion of the CACs could be used to be applied to this particular project or not?
No, I was referring to our intention to use that for social housing opportunities elsewhere in the community, likely in Little Mountain area.
Okay. And perhaps I can speak to the, to the applicant. Thank you.
Hello.
Hi, thanks for being here. So my question, as you probably gathered from my discussion with Ms. Bond, is with the 5 tenants who are currently there, is it possible to look at proposing some options which would keep their rent at the same modest level, i.e. not increase at affordability, but keep it as affordable? Is it possible within your proposal and pro forma to do that?
Thank you, Councillor Carr. In our tenant relocation plan, what we were offering is to also assist the existing tenants, the opportunity for relocation services to help them find space in the area. And we've been in constant contact with them, as was noted. 3 of the tenancies have come in after the rezoning application was made to our long-term. We've looked in the area to see options that are comparable to what they're currently in. And we've managed to find, for example, in the 1-bedroom, a range from $500 to $700, which is within the range of what they're currently paying. The 1-bedroom is currently paying. Same with the 2 bedrooms. We've found it within the range that's comparable to what they're currently paying as well. And we've looked at Craigslist, and we keep in contact with the tenants. When the time comes to let them know, we will, along with the 2 months free rent, offer that opportunity to relocate, as well as, I think what hasn't been touched on, but it is in the report, is an allowance for moving services. I think it was a $750 allowance per tenant for the relocation.
Okay, so it is feasible to achieve something in the order of what they're currently paying.
I think, yes, that's
with your research.
Within the current proposal.
And what about long-term?
That's your time, Councillor Carr.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to go to Councillor Meggs.
Welcome.
As for Ms. Bond, I think it's striking that we've spent so much time dealing with tenancy issues when we're in a land use discussion, but I just want to go back to the rate of change guidelines. Is it fair to say they achieve meaning because they're interlocked to a degree with the Residential Tenancy Act, and that some element, the Development Permit Board at the final stage is required to take into consideration certain aspects of the thing? There's supposed to be notices that are aligned with the Residential Tenancy Act, or is this strictly something that we have embedded in our own bylaws and do in our own motion?
There are some requirements, obviously, under the Residential Tenancy Act, but the tenant relocation plans that Council has started to see in over recent months do go above and beyond what the RTA is requiring.
But they're above and beyond on a voluntary basis, as I understand it. If I read the guidelines, they're pretty close to what we see here today.
That's right. So our own guidelines do go a little bit above the Residential Tenancy Act, and a number of these relocation plans that you're seeing, of which this is one, does go above and beyond, again, what is required both under our own guidelines and the RTA.
So do you feel that the city has the authority to do a different, could we impose different tenant relocation plans in different circumstances, or is the base case always the guidelines themselves?
The base case is the guidelines, but obviously a rezoning is involves a number of negotiation pieces. Whilst we feel that this is a fair tenant relocation plan and generally in line with some of the other ones, if council want to see further issues dealt with through the relocation plan, then it's really only the applicant that can speak to what the implication is that for their project.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Meggs. Councillor Reimer.
Thanks. A couple questions also on this tenancy issue. So is it 2 tenants or 2 households? I guess the point is there, I don't need to know the size of the households, but the way you've been discussing it, it says though 1 person lives in each of these two bedrooms.
That's correct.
So it's 1 person in a 2-bedroom. Okay, so 2 tenants across 4 bedrooms, essentially, in 2 units. Sorry, I'm only referring to the two that did not already sign agreements where they understood they were on a short-term tenancy.
There's 2 single tenants in the two-bedroom units that are both long-term tenants.
Okay, that is very helpful to know. So they are being offered, under the law, any tenant is required 2 months notice plus 1 month rent. You are offering 2 months notice plus 2 months rent plus the full damage deposit, although whether or not the unit is damaged, I mean, it sounds like your intention is to damage it quite significantly, so that's understandable. You're also offering moving expenses out and then again back in if they choose the right of first refusal. And if this is a single tenant, they could choose then to move back into a 2-bedroom under the right of first refusal, something we wouldn't allow in, say, social housing, but we're fine with here.
Yeah, if it was social housing, there would be an eligibility requirement that they may or may not meet.
Right.
So it's really the 3 options that are being provided within a certain benchmark of rent, and the fact that they're getting that first right of refusal with a particular rent limit attached to it. Those are the pieces that go above and beyond what both our guidelines say and the Residential Tenancy Act requires.
And then let's say they did choose either the one bedroom in the proposed application or one of the 2 bedrooms, they would get 20% off the rents in those new units at the time of occupancy, and then it would go up under the RTA. So it would always be less than the others, presumably. It may not be exactly 20%, but it would be, okay. Okay, thanks.
All right, finally, Councillor Ball, questions for staff?
Yes, thank you, Ms. Bond. Hi. I just have a few questions from people in the neighborhood, just confirming that the average current monthly rent referred to in your, it refers to old buildings, right? Old existing buildings in the neighborhood. That when you use the term average, you're not referring to the number of new buildings that exist, because it's been mentioned a number of times to me that they can go for 1,900 to 220 for in terms of the newer buildings. So I'm just confirming that we're just talking about old buildings here, the ones that remain.
Yeah, so the within 10% in relation to the tenant relocation plan is for the average in this area, which includes all of the rental stock in the area. There is a table in the report which does reference average market rent in newer buildings, and that's really just to give you a benchmark. That's not the number or the benchmark that relates to the tenant relocation plan.
Right, just to confirm that. And the other question that has come to me is, in terms of people being able to stay in a new building as opposed to an older building, the costs are dramatically higher to run that building. So even if their rent stayed below the others, it would still have to rise compared to being in an older building, right? So it's better for the tenants to go into an older building than a new building?
Difficult to say. Older buildings may have substantial renovations that need to happen, and if a landlord may need to look at ways to finance that, both in terms of raising money either through a mortgage or a debt, and also possibly trying to pass that on to the tenants. But generally, we do see more affordability across the board in older rental buildings. That is true.
And then the final question that came to me again is about the CACs. The question that came to me is that the amenities in that community are overloaded already. How and why are we bringing more people in without planning for more amenities? And I got this question over and over again on a number of our planning, but again, it came through on this one. So it would be helpful to know why all the funds are going into housing to bring more people without providing an amenity. So if I could answer that, it would be helpful.
Sure. So again, this policy was developed along with Little Mountain. When we developed the Little Mountain policy statement, a comprehensive area-wide public benefit analysis was done. The Little Mountain site is delivering some significant public benefits in the way of a neighborhood housing, neighborhood house, childcare, replacement housing, improvements to Queenie Park. So this is in consideration of that. This is extra public benefits layered on top of that. So it was viewed with an area-wide approach on what is existing and to be delivered in the future through the larger site.
So are we looking at all of these projects not providing any amenity contribution, or is that a possibility in the future?
So all future proposals within the adjacent area would be guided by the policy document, and so would also have the same direction to direct CAC dollars towards the Affordable Housing Reserve Fund.
So not amenities as they're classically known. I know that you're using the term amenity for housing now, but I'm speaking of the classic amenities which neighborhoods regard as amenities, community centers, neighborhood houses, etc. So I'm just wondering if that means there will be no funds going into that.
Yes, Susan Haid, Assistant Director of Planning for Vancouver South. I just wanted to clarify and emphasize that the current application is consistent with the Little Mountain Adjacent Area Policy as it pertains to the public benefit strategy. That public benefit strategy was assessed based on need in the area, and as Graham Winterbottom indicated, those needs were looked at holistically with the Little Mountain rezoning proposal, or that policy statement as well. So that amenity package was looked at very holistically based on the impacts of future growth associated with both of those policy statements and rezoning policy. So in sum, it's consistent with the policy, and it is delivering on identified community needs that were done through the assessment of both of those policy pieces together.
And forgive me, just in terms of explaining this to the public, that language is very difficult to explain. So are we saying no more, we're not putting money into the classic amenities, we're putting it into just housing, or are we still planning to do further classic amenities like parks, neighborhood houses? Are those part of the plan? Because I'm sorry, I don't have the grand plan right in front of me here, and most people reading it don't understand. So I'm trying to just understand what you're saying.
Okay. So for the planning, the Little Mountain planning, Little Mountain adjacent area, Council has adopted policy in terms of public benefits that those community amenity contributions go towards affordable housing in the area, including the Little Mountain area and the Riley Park South area. The policy for Little Mountain, per se, has a comprehensive public benefit strategy that includes many public benefits such as childcare, neighborhood house, park enhancement, transportation enhancements, and social housing. So any rezoning projects according to council policy will deliver on those amenities identified in those policy documents. For rezoning applications outside of that area, they may contribute to other community benefits in the city. And I think an important point is in terms of maintenance of existing capital infrastructure, that's not addressed through community amenity contributions, because as per provincial requirements, they must be linked to impacts associated with growth and development. So I hope that clarifies. Thank you.
Okay. And that's your time. That's, I think, it for questions. I've got Councillor Louis on the queue. Did you have a motion ready?
Perhaps just for further clarification from staff in regards.
There needs to be a motion for us to do more questions.
I will be happy to support the recommendations and move them, Mr. Mayor.
Okay.
And then perhaps I'll just take the opportunity to ask for some further clarification in regards to the question of community amenity contributions in the adjacent area and the decision of council, because you've cited it several times now that council made the decision to allocate it towards affordable housing. But when that decision was made, it was based on a staff recommendation after a tremendous amount of work was undertaken to determine what the needs in the area was, and based on some community input, which my recollection was that the community wanted a significant increase in the amount of supports for affordability and social housing as part of the Little Mountain redevelopment as a whole, including the adjacent area as well. So maybe just describe to me how that process was undertaken and what sort of meetings, who was there?
Yes, so the consultation process for the Little Mountain policy statement was very extensive and occurred over a number of years. It involved extensive public consultation, both through workshops, meeting with local community groups and stakeholders. As part of that policy statement, at the time it was before council, and based on further community input, there was a desire to achieve the 20% affordable and social housing target for large sites. And there was really a further refinement to that to achieve that 20% affordable and social housing through contributions of the Little Mountain adjacent area. So that 20% target in terms of social affordable housing on Little Mountain and the adjacent area is above and beyond the replacement of existing social housing units on the Little Mountain site. So yes, excellent point that it was very much shaped by assessment of community need, but extensive community input and council guidance on that.
Thank you.
Okay, to the motion, Councillor Carr.
Mr. Mayor, I have forwarded an amendment to the clerk. Maybe we can see it. Okay, my amendment is based on the concerns raised by speakers and the answer to the question that I did pose to the applicant around the fact that there is available housing at comparable to the current rent, that the applicant amend the tenant relocation plan to offer at least one option to each current tenant at a rent comparable to their current rent. So I guess I first have to know if we're in an amendment queue, and I'm speaking just to the amendment. Right, okay. So I feel strongly that, that this is, well, first of all, we should recognize that, that the applicant has really undertaken due diligence in searching out these rents and has indicated that that is a possibility. So I ask you to take that into consideration when you're voting on this amendment. Number two, I think that I would like you all to consider the fact that the Riley Park South Cambie Vision Implementation Committee is generally supportive of this project, and this is the one stumbling block for them. So that if we were to add this, it would, I think, ease the concern. And number three, we have had at this council table a number of other projects that have come forward with tenant relocation plans consistent with the kind of language that I'm offering for this particular proposal. So I just urge you all to accept this. Thank you.
And I've got Councillor Reimer to the amendment.
It's just a question for clarification. If Councillor Carr was proposing that these single tenants be offered a two-bedroom, like a comparable unit at a comparable rent, or whether you're just looking for a comparable rent? Okay. Okay. I think both ways it has issues. I actually, based on my read of the surrounding market, one could find a one-bedroom or even a 1+ den on Craigslist, which I just found, for comparable rent. And it's not that I'm opposed to people having extra space, but when we're talking about public benefits, and I find it a much more challenging proposition, especially having done the homeless count this morning and knowing how many people have no space. So I think it's a bit ill thought through. It's not, it doesn't explain what it's trying to achieve well enough for me to support it. And under the current tenant relocation plan, there does seem to be a significant amount of latitude to find appropriate housing under actually a lower rent than they're paying right now. Smaller, but lower, and still quite adequate for one person.
Okay, Councillor Louis to the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And in addition to the reasons cited by Councillor Reimer, the prospect of a superior unit is also available, not only in comparable rent, perhaps smaller in size, but likely superior in its physical state, as described by staff, that these units are in some level of disrepair, and also the fact that the current rents, it was for at least 3 of the 5, it was contemplated that it'd be undergoing a renovation or redevelopment, that and as a result of that, the rent rates were kept, it appears, artificially low. And therefore, to then punish, I think, the developer, which has then kept the rates artificially low, knowing that there'd be a redevelopment at this point in time, seems a bit of poor judgment, given that we would want our developers that are going through these processes not to jack up their rates as high as they can go in advance of a public hearing, so in order to protect themselves from this type of situation. We would want them to keep our tenants in place and keep it as low as possible for any given time until they come through to rezoning. So for those reasons, I'm against the amendment.
Thanks, Councillor Louis. Councillor Affleck.
Well, I'll support it. I think Councillor Louis has low expectations of the development community by his last statement. I think that they would be willing to do this. I think the addition from Councillor Carr addresses a concern we've heard tonight, and I think that's what our job is to do, and so I will support it.
Okay, any further speakers to the amendment? Councillor Meggs.
Well, I would like to see tenant protection enhanced across the board, and I worry about a situation that sees council stepping in at this stage to direct how a tenant relocation package should look without really having been involved in the specifics of the application. It creates a lot of uncertainty, I think. I also wonder about this situation where, if I understand the amendment properly, would provide protection to people who moved in since the rezoning was sought, in most instances, at least doesn't make that distinction. So I share the concerns of some of my colleagues that it's the wrong time. I would much prefer that the province strengthen these regulations across the board so that everybody in the province who is a tenant would understand exactly what was happening, as well as any landlord looking at redevelopment. But this one-off approach, unless it's volunteered, I'm reluctant to impose it at this late stage of a hearing any more than I would impose some other things. It would be better, I think, for those who have concerns like this to vote against the rezoning.
Thanks, Councillor Meggs. And that's all I have on the queue for to the amendment. And we're going to go to a vote on Councillor Carr's amendment. Council will pull up their Okay, votes are in, 10 total votes, 3 in favor, 7 in opposition. So the amendment does not carry. And we go back to Councillor Carr speaking to the main motion.
That this zoning application is generally consistent with the Little Mountain Adjacent Area rezoning policy. Implementation Committee represented in its statement tonight, saying that they see in general a consistency, but they had one key concern. And I am very disappointed in my colleagues at this council table that did not see the fit to have the vision to actually support the amendment, especially since language like this may, create hardship for the developer when the applicant actually said that they were already seeking out rents of comparable nature. So it did not look to me like this would be a hardship. This was simply putting into our motion what the applicant in due diligence was already pursuing. We are not the province. We are a city council. This is within our jurisdiction. We can't change the rules at the provincial level, but we can make it easier for people to find housing that is truly affordable for them, especially as we are in a situation where the older affordable housing stock is being replaced by what is not currently affordable. We are going to become a city that is less and less affordable if we keep doing this. This was a chance to protect at least 5 people. I mean, it's only 5, but it was a chance to do that. I'm very disappointed in the rejection of my amendment, and I will not be supporting the application as a consequence.
Okay, we shuffled the queues a little there, and I don't know if anyone got bumped off. Councillor Louis to the, actually you'd be closing,
Sure.
So we'll go to Councillor Ball.
So we're now on the main motion?
Yes.
Confirm. I will be voting for the main motion because I do live in the wider neighborhood, and I do understand that people are not against this actual development. What they did want is to have some security, a little further security for those tenants who are long-term tenants. And I feel from hearing from the developer that that is their interest and that they will work very hard to make sure that those people are looked after. I am disappointed, I think like a lot of the neighborhood, that we're not looking at actual traditional amenities, but I do know how desperate the need for housing in that area is, for clean housing, for new housing, for housing that makes it possible for families, small families, to be able to live in the neighborhood. Our schools are good there, but there just aren't enough places to live. So I will be voting for it, and I hope that as we look further, that we actually do reconsider the issue of amenities in the neighborhood.
Thank you, Councillor Ball. I'm going to go to Councillor Reimer and then back to Councillor Louis for closing.
To briefly say that I will be supporting it, as Councillor Carr pointed out, it substantively complies with all applicable policies, both on built form and the CAC side. I did want to put in a plug. I know staff have been working on it. These are very significant. The tenant relocation policy, these issues that have been highlighted today are obviously very significant ones that the more clarity we had so that when amendments like this are brought forward, words like comparable can be understood in terms of their fullness as opposed to what they may or may not have intended. And also the issues that Councillor Louis raised around people who do sign agreements fully at the time understanding what the end of life provision of that lease is and how we deal with those in the context of a broad relocation policy. Because I think these issues, we do have a lot of stock aging out, as we all know, and there is a need for new stock as well, and sometimes those two issues collide. So this tenant relocation policy is not insubstantial.
All right, Councillor Louis, closing comments on the motion.
Thank you. The application itself, as has been stated, is compliant with our policies. It meets the intent of what Council had decided for the area, including its community amenity contribution in relation to its allocation for the social housing and the affordable housing allocation. This is a significant investment into affordability in our city. By voting against this, we do not attract that CAC that will be then allocated to affordability in our city. to argue that because in the instance of two of the current tenants, which are overhoused and paying at a rate that is below market for the area, setting aside that three of the five knew full well that they'd be undertaking a redevelopment of the area, seems odd that we would forgive or forego that contribution to affordable housing in our city to the tune of over $500,000. In addition to that, this redevelopment provides a refreshing of that rental stock. All 8 units of that rental stock will now be coming into the fold of secured market rental for the city for 60 years or for the life of the building. And that is also a contribution to the affordability of our city, perhaps not immediately, but certainly later on as it ages, it becomes more affordable, as all rental stock in our city has. And so to argue the pure affordability question on the situation of 2 of the 5 tenants seems to, in my mind, to be a minor situation in comparison to the larger picture of what we're accomplishing as a result of this redevelopment. And as I've stated, 8 units being secured for 60 years of life of the building and a significant contribution to the Affordable Housing Fund. And those are, in my mind, compelling. And thank you for staff's work on this and to the developer for bringing forward this project, because I do think that it is a good project. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Louie. And that's all the speakers I have. We will go to the voting screen, and I'll ask Council to vote on the motion, moving the recommendations. Item number 2. And we have results, 10 votes in, 9 in favor, 1 in opposition. So the motion carries on item number 2, and we have concluded on that item. Thanks to our staff, thanks to everyone who came to speak on that, and to the applicant team for bringing that forward. And we are on to our third and final item, the one that has by far the most speakers to it. Thanks to all of you for being patient here. We are on the text amendment now, proposed amendments to the Downtown Official Development Plan. I'll ask Madam Clerk to read the application and summary of correspondence received.
This is an application by the General Manager of Planning and Development Services to amend the Downtown Official Development Plan to implement objectives of the Downtown East Side Plan, the West End Plan, the Healthy City Strategy, and Housing and Homelessness Strategy. These changes include, but are not limited to, 1, substituting the term social housing for low-cost housing and adding a definition for secure market rental housing, which would apply to all sites within the DODP boundary. 2, removing future residential uses and increasing commercial density in the Robson Village, Area E, and 3, allowing for increased height and density to provide social housing and secured market rental housing in the Victory Square area, which is Area C2. Some of these changes were previously approved by Council in 2014. However, residents living or working outside of the West End and Downtown East Side Plan areas may not have been aware that they were also affected. The amendments are being considered by Council following an expanded community notification covering all of the DODP area. The General Manager of Planning and Development Services recommends approval subject to the conditions as set out in the summary and recommendation of the public hearing agenda. And Council has received the following correspondence since this application was referred to public hearing and up to 4 p.m. today. There's been 3 emails and letters in support, 159 form letters in support, giving a total of 162 in support, 34 emails and letters in opposition, 6 emails related to other matters, and then 27 comment sheets and 7 form letters from the open house on March 19th have been received. Also 23 submissions received via the Planning Department online form. That's up to 4 p.m. today.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. And we have Kevin McNaney here, our Assistant Director for Planning and Vancouver Downtown Division, to present the application. Mr.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and Council. Kevin McNaney, Assistant Director of Planning. As the clerk very comprehensively described, I'm here to present some changes to the Downtown Official Development Plan, or DODP as we call it. The changes were initially considered by Council last spring in February and April respectively, following the adoption of two policy plans, one for the West End community and one for the downtown east side area and neighborhood. Each of these plans put forward a bunch of technical amendments to various zones and districts to implement the plan, and they went through a similar public hearing process to this. Go to the next slide. There was a court challenge to an individual development at 508 Helmkin, which also impacted these changes to the DODP area, and I'll explain how they did momentarily. In January 27th of 2015, the court quashed these DODP amendments for the West End plan, also the development permit for social housing under construction at 1099 Richards, and the rezoning at 508 Helmkin Street. Each of these bullets is going through its own separate process for additional council consideration. Tonight we're speaking to the first bullet, which is the DODP amendments from the West End plan, and that's the subject of this public hearing. In 2 weeks from now, the neighborhood has just been notified that there will be a development permit board meeting for 1099 Richard Street, which is the social housing site that was generated from the rezoning at 508 Helmkin Street. The final bullet is a rezoning application that council just referred to public hearing this morning and will be at hearing in several weeks from now with due notification. So staff recommend in this report that council repeal the amendments to the DODP bylaw 19029 made by council as part of the Downtown East Side plan and reconsider both the amendments to the DODP by the West End plan and the Downtown East Side plan together. The reason we're suggesting that you repeal the Downtown East Side amendments is that they were not actually quashed by the courts, but they were notified in a similar way, and so we are exercising due diligence to ensure that the public is fully aware of those amendments and bring them back with the West End amendments at this public hearing. The court's key concern relates to the map that you see in the top right. On the left-hand side in the gray, you see the West End area, which is roughly Georgia and Burrard over to Stanley Park. And on the left, you see the downtown east side area, which is roughly Carroll and Victory Square further east over to Strathcona. Where they overlap with the dark gray, which is the downtown ODP, are areas that were changed in terms of some uses and densities, and they include Robson Street and Victory Square. There were also changes made to the overall development plan area relating to definitions of of social housing and secured market rental housing. And the concern of the court was that people might have confused the West End amendments with the notion that we were also making changes in the overall ODP area. Hence, we're back here tonight after additional notification. In the table below, you see the levels of notification that are required. By the Vancouver Charter, we're required to post an announcement of a public hearing. Our general typical ODP amendments would be to do that posting, of course, which is required, but then post on the city website, email all the neighborhood groups and the people who have expressed interest to let them know about a public hearing and an ODP change. With the West End and Downtown East Side ODP amendments, we went further than that, in that we sent postcards to the residents in the area, and we also used social media as much as possible because we had engaged so many people in these multi-year processes that we were able to reach more people that way. Finally, as a result of the court's direction to do an enhanced notification, we did all of those things, including mailing out over 30,000 postcards to all residents in the DODP, to both the owners as well as ad mail and businesses as well. And we used the other mechanisms such as social media. So we've really tried to enhance the notification to ensure that people are aware of these challenges in response to the court challenges around the notification process. Now, in terms of the proposed amendments to the ODP, these are generally the same as what we brought to you last year. For the overall ODP area, they include an update to the definition of social housing, which I suspect will be the subject of much conversation tonight, and we can get more deeply into that. A new definition for secured market rental housing, which is also something that we like to bonus for, or we need to bonus for in order to meet council's housing objectives. And clarity around considerations for when and how additional density can be considered to achieve social housing through the Development Permit Board and the level to which the Development Permit Board can approve both density bonuses for social housing versus when we have to come back to council for additional approval of that density. In the Robson Village area, this was an area that was changed by the West End plan in terms of the downtown official development plan. And in this area, we generally kept the heights the same at roughly 70 feet to keep ensuring there's a vibrant, sunny sidewalks for a shopping area. We increased the commercial density from 1 FSR to 3 FSR to reflect the ability to build more dense retail and office in that shopping district to keep it vibrant. And we removed residential from the area to ensure the long-term vibrancy of the commercial areas as part of our village strategies. Noting also that we grandfathered in some of the limited residential that exists there today. In the Victory Square area, we had a previous provision where you could build up to 100 feet from 70 feet if you had at least a minimum of 2/3 social housing. What we've done is we've increased it to building up to 105 feet to reflect an extra 5 feet to make the retail better in Victory Square, because we heard from the businesses that they weren't getting the retail clearance they needed. We also allowed this bonus to be available for secured market rental housing, so it had the same opportunity to build additional height and density up to 105 feet and 6 FSR where you were doing secured market rental housing. And that was to help to meet some of the spectrum of housing needs across the downtown east side, noting of course that there are great needs for social housing in the area which are met by different areas of the plan. There are a number of supporting initiatives, but just to remind you of the West End plan itself, there was a significant amount of discussion on some of the topics you'll hear tonight in terms of the shopping areas, in terms of the need for social housing, in terms of the need for secured market rental housing. The plan addressed this greatly by protecting the rental housing stock, reminding us all, of course, that about 80% of the city's rental housing is in the West End, provides incredibly important affordable housing supply, but also by allowing density bonusing in certain areas for social housing and for rental housing. And through this process, we engaged more than 7,500 people in these discussions about social and rental housing and the neighborhood. The Downtown East Side plan was equally extensive and intensive. It was over a 4-year process. Deep engagement with the local area plan committee, deep engagement with some of the Chinatown communities, the Gastown communities in Strathcona, and extensive conversation in the area acknowledging the need for more social housing and secured market rental housing. So we've honored that plan in terms of protecting the heritage, but allowing growth to provide affordable social housing and rental housing where it's possible. And that engaged more than 5,000 people in that process, including almost weekly meetings with the local area plan committee. There are 2 other initiatives where these topics at hand tonight were discussed extensively, the housing and the homelessness strategy, which essentially was a citywide discussion of the definition of social housing, the definition of secured market rental housing. And those definitions are the ones that we're considering updating the downtown official development plan with tonight. So they've had a lot of discussion across the city in terms of how we define these uses. And also the Healthy City strategy had a significant discussion around social housing and secured market rental housing, which is reflective of the conversation this evening. So all in all, there were more than 16,000 people engaged in these discussions and the definitions we're talking to you tonight, and around 5,000 to 7,000 depending on the plan and some of the more minor technical land use changes in the Robson Village and in Victory Square. We did hold one additional open house, as we mentioned, at the request of council when we referred this report, in acknowledgement that people who lived inside the DODP area who may not have been involved in the initial discussions for these plans would get an opportunity to speak to the issues. At the request of council, we held it in a location that was accessible to the downtown east side, the west end, and downtown south, which was the central branch of the library. And we had a lot of people flow through that night, over 410 participants. We received a total of 27 comment forms. 13 of those were in support, 8 were mixed support and non-support, depending on the issue, and 6 were in non-support altogether. And we've provided those to you tonight, Council. So with that, I think I would just say thank you, and to acknowledge as well that there is one yellow memo that was sent to you. It's for information only. It does not require any actions by council. And what it is a simple correction to Appendix B, which is for information only, where some of the struck out text, there are a few words that were wrong in the text. So it requires no action of council. The bylaws as posted were correct for this evening, but it's for information. And we sent out a second version today that really accentuated some of the formatting to ensure that you can understand those changes in Appendix B. I do have other staff with me tonight, including staff from the West End and Downtown East Side, as well as Ms. Bond for some of the conversations around housing definitions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. McNaney, and appreciate your concise summary and presentation. And we are going to go to a quick round of questions from council for staff before we start hearing from our speakers. And first up is Councillor Reimer.
Thank you, Mayor Robertson. A couple of questions. Thank you for the presentation. So these proposed amendments result from two separate planning processes that were conducted over the course of 3 to 4 years, depending, downtown east side 4 years, west end 3 years. Over 12,500 people involved in those processes, advisory committees, both resident advisory, design advisory, external feedback, plus another 4,000 or so involved in policy discussions related to these plans.
That's correct. Everything in the West End, from booths at the Pride Festival to the Senior Strawberry Social, and then the downtown east side, the local area plan committee was predominantly low income, acknowledging some of the challenges in the area. There were people involved in sex trade and drug trade. There were Chinese seniors, and as well, we went to as many festivals as we could, like the Powell Street Festival.
So in the case of the court case, which brings us back here, it's like Groundhog's Day all over again on these amendments, the judge found no error in the process of consultation or the conclusion of counsel a year ago. What the judge found in narrow relation to these amendments today was an error in the notification area.
That's correct.
And that error didn't actually extend to the downtown east side provisions, but you're bringing them back out of an abundance of caution. Is that a fair characterization?
That's correct. We're being prudent to ensure this, because it was a similar notification process, we want to ensure that everyone has a chance to speak to the issues.
Okay. So I know I asked you these questions many times about a year ago, but I'll ask again. So the old definition, this is speaking specifically to the social housing definition now. Under the old definition, or I guess now current again definition, pending these proposed amendments, my understanding was there was no defined rate, only defined ownership must be owned by nonprofit or government, and some guidelines around how one might set those rates, but no actual requirement to set them at a particular level.
That's right. The old definition of social housing doesn't speak directly to the level of affordability or the number of units within a particular social housing development also that has to meet that test of affordability, compared to the new one, which speaks to the affordability level, the ownership, and the security of those units as well.
So under the old and current now definition, pending these proposed amendments, what kinds of things could be built? As I understand it, there are co-ops that were owned by the Right Thing, a nonprofit, but could have 100% market units in them, and that would meet the test of social housing under the old definition.
Yes, it says, purchased by, government or nonprofit using government funding, available to senior citizens or persons with handicap, and or people with low, individuals with low income or families with low income. So you could pick one of those. So seniors, for example, with no particular income requirements or affordability, and you would have met the test under what is effectively the current definition in the downtown.
Sorry, and I can't get over calling it old because it was for a while the old definition, but I'll try and call it current. So under the provisions that you're proposing tonight, the downtown east side areas, it'd be the first time that shelter rate was guaranteed, and even it'd be guaranteed and at a minimum number. The applicant could go higher if they could find a way to make that work for their pro forma.
Yeah, the changes we made to the downtown east side went further than just aligning that definition with a much more usual citywide approach, which is to see a minimum of 30% of the unit at the housing income limits. But it then went further to secure at least a third of those at that shelter rate designed for people on very low fixed incomes.
Last question, the hills, which I'm guessing Councillor Carr might have some questions about to define them, but they're a BC housing tool. Does BC Housing themselves require 100% of units to be rented at hills?
Their social housing eligibility really speaks to their focus is definitely on hills, but there are often projects which have a mixture of other market rents in as well.
Okay, thank you.
Right, Councillor Louis, questions?
Yes. In regards to the density bonusing that is included as part of this, maybe just describe how density bonusing is achieved, for what purposes, and where.
Thank you, Councillor.
Because there has been some comment that it's unlimited density bonusing, and just to clarify, that's
I
not
won't
the
talk
case.
you through the density bonusing everywhere, but I will give you an example of how it works. Because in Appendix C, page 2 of 2, there's a comprehensive summary of all the density bonusing within the downtown ODP. What I will speak to is downtown south. The way the zoning works in downtown south is with a minimum frontage of, I think, 175 feet. We consider those large sites. And on the large sites, you can have up to 5 FSR of market housing, condos, and up to 300 feet. Generally, you end up with, because the block sizes are all the same, you end up with 2 towers and a smaller site in between. Those small sites are the ones where we really see the ability to provide more affordable housing. So if you want to build market housing on those sites, you can only have 3 FSR floor space ratio and 70 feet. However, in the ODP, if you choose to build social housing, more than 2/3 social housing on that site, 2/3, you can have up to 120 feet and 5 FSR. In the ODP, councils delegate that authority to the Development Permit Board. If you're doing 100% social housing, council or the Development Permit Board can allow additional density, but not additional height, so you are quite constrained. But if there's an opportunity to get a little bit more social housing on those sites, and it works from an urban design perspective, the Development Board can say, yes, it works from an urban design and use perspective. Then a report goes back to council to ensure that you're fine with that additional density beyond 5 FSR, which is what you've delegated in the ODP.
Okay, so why the change to bring it back to council?
So initially, when we did the West End plan, we didn't have that provision in the Downtown East Side plan. We asked council to remove that provision to come back to council. What we've heard is that you'd like that provision to remain in place, and that you'd like the ability to approve density beyond the limits outlined in the zoning for social housing. So you want it to come back to you. So what happens is the Development Permit Board approves that density, in this case, in that example, above 5 FSR, maybe to 6 or 7. It comes back to council. Council says, yes, we agree with that density for social housing. Then the development permit is issued. So council gives its nod to the additional density.
So it could be framed that it's an additional level of scrutiny, that council ultimately makes that decision prior to issuance of the development permit. And this is an increase of opportunity for not just for council to weigh into the concept of additional density, but also for public to come and speak to council directly on whether or not we would prefer to happen that to happen or not.
That's correct. You set the parameters under which density bonusing can take place in terms of density and height, and you give the Development Permit Board a little more leeway for additional density, not height, not changing site size. They hear from the community as well when they determine the urban design, and then council ultimately decides that that additional density beyond what's laid out here makes sense.
Thank you.
All right, Councillor DiGenova, next.
Thank you very much. I have a few questions, and I'm going to start with this one that's a little bit confusing. However, in Appendix B on page 5 of 28, low-cost housing was defined as shall mean sleeping, housekeeping, or dwelling units designed for persons receiving War Veterans Allowance, Canadian Pension Commission, Disability Pension, Guaranteed Income Supplement, Spouse's Allowance, or income from Guaranteed Annual Income from Need. Then I see that social housing shall mean residential units purchased by a government or nonprofit housing group using available government funding for housing senior citizens, handicapped persons, or individuals or families of low income. Then on the next page, page 6, it's amended to say that social housing means rental housing in which at least 30% of the dwelling units are occupied by households with incomes below housing income limits as set out in the current HILS or housing income limits, which I understand from BC Housing. However, there's no definition of those most vulnerable people who are listed in low-cost housing or social housing. And I understand from other projects that have come to us, some of the rents prescribed by the Hills formula are $850 a month. And some of these people who are on income assistance only receive $375. So I'm wondering how we can make sure that we are capturing these people in our new definitions of social housing. And the second part to that question is, have city staff consulted with BC Housing and with our housing partners, and are they on board with our new definitions? And will they step up with rent supplements to ensure that these most vulnerable citizens will be able to afford the Hills limits? Thank you.
So the first part of that question relates to the Hills units. This change in the DODP is designed to enable the provision of social housing in this location. So the bonus density provisions that Mr. McNaney referred to work to encourage, if you like, encourage and make possible the delivery of social housing in this community. And this community was originally much more dominated by lower rent housing than it is now. So it's has been very important through the changes in this community to make sure that that space, that provision has been retained in the community, whilst also the provision of new market housing in the area. And so that bonus density provision relies on those social housing definitions, if you like, to for staff to determine whether they meet those tests, they meet those definitions. The Hills units, this way that we've described it, although it's new, it's a proposal is new for this area, it's not a new definition as such. We have used or referenced the way of describing social housing like this elsewhere in the city in relation to the exemption of DCLs for social housing. This is where these tests in terms of affordability and ownership and security have come from. So this is much more aligned with the way we have dealt with social housing in the remainder of the city. So that was the first part of your question. Could you maybe repeat?
The second part of my question is, has BC Housing and our housing partners been consulted, and do they, and if so, what is the feedback staff has received on the new definitions of low-cost housing and social housing?
So we have been in communication with BC Housing and also our social housing partners. This definition that we put forward puts forward what the minimum requirement is. As you'll see from other projects coming forward, it is often better for the city working with land use densities and bonus provisions to do better than these provisions provide. But it does also provide some flexibility that depending on what kind of project, the location in the city, whether there's free land or what kind of equity those partners are able to bring to the table, it still makes sure it gives those partners enough flexibility to ensure that the project can move forward on a capital basis and is also operationally sustainable over the long term. And so we've heard from many of our social housing partners that they're keen to provide social housing in locations like this, but they need some flexibility in the absence of any other government subsidies to make those sustainable over the long term. And this kind of definition, whilst it sets a test, it also gives them some flexibility to make those projects workable.
Thank you.
Okay, that is your time, and Councillor Carr is next with questions.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Ms. Bond, I think it'll totally be you. Thanks very much. I think Councillor Reimer anticipated where my questioning would go. My first question is around the term, again, the difference between the terms low-cost housing and social housing. If we at Council received an application under the terms of low-cost housing as a definition, can we assume then that some portion or all, but at least there would be inclusion in that proposal of housing that would be for people with, I guess the whole list is in here, seniors, handicaps, individuals of low income, veterans, I mean, there's quite a list, and it's listed on page 7 as well as in the appendix that Councillor DeGenova wrote. We can assume that there would be some portion of housing for those individuals, correct?
That's right. If that was included, that's correct.
That if it was if it was the low cost housing, correct. Okay, if we receive an application under the definition that's proposed for social housing, which, just to clarify from what Councillor Reimer originally stated, my understanding is that this would only in the downtown east side Oppenheimer district was it specific that 30% would be for shelter at shelter rate. The general definition we're looking at is social housing, which is 1/3 at the Hills rate and the other 2/3 at market rate.
So just to clarify,
market rental.
The downtown east side,
yes,
the changes, the additional of the 1/3 at the shelter rate does relate to areas not just the downtown east side Oppenheimer district, but also Victory Square, and I think almost all of the areas apart from Chinatown because of the heritage issues in Chinatown. So just to be clear that 1/3 is across the board in the downtown east side apart from Chinatown.
Apart from, okay, but is it the Hills rate or the shelter rate that is being applied in the downtown official development plan?
Just the 30%, a minimum of 30% of the units must rent at a maximum of the Hills rate. So you could have within that 30%, and you're likely to see projects coming forward where there's a full range of rents from shelter up to a maximum of Hills within that 30%. And we often see, and council sees, projects performing much better than that in terms of affordability, where you can see almost 50% of the units getting to some kind of either a shelter rate or a rent that's affordable to someone on a fixed income. So we often see better than this definition. And again, the purpose of that is to enable some flexibility to the nonprofits looking to bring these projects forward.
Okay, so I understand, and thank you for clarifying that about the flexibility. I'm just trying to be very clear in my mind that, again, if we get a proposal under low-cost housing, whatever that proportion of housing is that's called low cost will be for the individuals, the kind of individuals with incomes listed in that definition, the veterans, the seniors, the people with disability, right? Under this new definition, it could be whatever the portion is that's social housing, at least 1/3 would be at a maximum of the Hills rate. The other 2/3 of it could be market rental. And so could it be that we would get a situation where the rents would be more than would be affordable by those listed in the low-income housing option, the War Veterans Allowance, Canadian Pension Commission, disability, guaranteed income? Could it be that that would be the case?
That you would see those people
not able to afford the actual rents that are allowed under the definition of social housing.
The definition sets both
being
a
proposed,
maximum
yes,
and also a minimum.
Yes, yes,
as well.
Yes.
It's possible that a project could meet purely that test, apart from the area of Victory Square, where there is that additional affordability requirement.
Right.
But as I've mentioned, we don't usually see projects just meeting that minimum. We usually see projects and partners able to deliver a greater level of affordability than this test.
Okay, thank you.
Exactly.
Hey, Councillor Affleck, you have questions?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The more questions we ask, the more confusing this report gets, to be honest. Just two quick process questions, because we have a lot of speakers tonight. What changes, this new public process, what changes were made to the document as a result of the new public input that we've received? Can you define that for us?
Councillor, I think you'll see the public input that was given to us when we relaunched this consultation after it was referred was quite limited. We had 24 questionnaires filled out. We had a lot of form letters, as you've received, in support, and we had a lot of form letters against. The primary change, I would say, is bringing these changes back with that check-in with council again for density bonusing. and when it goes beyond what's prescribed in the ODP, because it sounds like that's the biggest concern along with the social housing definition.
Okay. And yesterday we received a memo. It was made public. It was some last minute changes. I'm wondering if you can just tell us what those changes were, so that, because that was last minute and that's always frustrating for
The
us
changes,
and the public.
sorry, the changes were simply a correction to an appendix which was provided for information only. Appendix A is the bylaw. That's the subject of tonight, but we recognize that it's tough to read bylaws. So what we did is did a strike and replace version of the ODP to reflect those bylaw changes in the ODP itself. And in one section, which I pointed out in the memo, I think it's page 18, the struck out text said the wrong text. Instead of low-cost housing, it said social housing in 3 places. The text that replaced it, the non-struck out text, which is the actual change, was correct. So we just brought it out to ensure that everyone understood what was going on.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, that is all the questions that we have from council. So we're ready to go to our speakers list, and we have, as I said, 24 people registered or thereabouts, and we'll just dive in here. And our first speaker is Civic Agency Representative, Chair of our Seniors Advisory Committee, Colleen McGuinness. And she is followed by Noy Leksinski and then Jean Swanson. Welcome.
Good evening, Mayor Robinson and members of council. I'm here tonight in my capacity as chair of the Seniors Advisory Committee. First, I'd like to thank you for the diverse and knowledgeable group of people who have joined the committee and are prepared to contribute their time, talents, and best efforts on behalf of seniors and older adults. We have 11 new members to the Seniors Advisory Committee this year. So 11 out of 15 is quite a learning curve. Our first meeting was last Friday. We had barely introduced ourselves before discussion turned to the information that was being circulated about the public hearing this evening and the changes recommended by staff to the definition of social housing. I have to say your recent conversation made me smile because we are just as confused as you people about what this means and what the implications are. So you have in front of you a motion that represents the unanimous conclusion that we reached after an hour of our discussion. Following the circulation of this motion, I was contacted by Mr. McTagney from the Planning Department. I was reminded that staff offered to brief us on the West End area plan, but there was no time on our agenda, and a presentation on the Downtown East Side plan was made to the Seniors Advisory Committee in 2013. Now, my attendance at these meetings has been pretty good, and I chaired the Housing Subcommittee for a number of years. I have no recollection of a detailed discussion about this particular important definition. It's obvious to me that an overview by staff did not get to the most critical element in the plan as far as we're concerned, the change in the definition. Our committee has simply not had the necessary information on the implications of this new definition, nor the time to thoughtfully formulate an informed response. Since many seniors and older adults in Vancouver require housing below market rent, we want to be convinced that the decision of this public hearing will not, over time, force fragile individuals to move or make drastic choices about how to keep a roof over their head. I speak on behalf of your Seniors Advisory Committee when I request that the Planning Department and City Housing officials make it a priority to meet regularly with our committee and possibly other related advisory committees such as the newly constituted Renters Committee, Persons with Disability, and the Women's Committee. The issue of secure, low-cost housing is one of our major concerns, but we need much more study before our group can offer an informed opinion. Since we now only have a 2-year term, it's vital that we be brought into the discussion much earlier. We are here to advise you, but in the time at hand, we cannot be confident that the needs of the growing population of older adults is going to be met with this change in the definition. Thank you for allowing me to express our concerns.
Thank you. And questions from Councillor DeGenova first.
Yes.
this evening on behalf of your committee. I just had a couple of questions, and the first question, first of all, thank you for coming. I was also interested to see if there were other committees, but I realized that some of the committees haven't even had a chance to form or have their first meeting yet.
We are the first committee to have had a meeting, so yes.
There we go. And as you mentioned, there's many others that are maybe affected persons with disabilities. I know that the Seniors Committee often meets with the Persons with Disabilities Advisory Committee. So I'm wondering what changes would have to be made to this plan? Is it just the definitions to include seniors and those wordings?
I honestly
committee.
I can't tell you.
Okay.
Because it is such a layered and very complex subject that what we would like is to have an informed conversation so that we can appreciate all of the nuances that the staff have tried to cover, and the staff can understand many of the nuances of the lifestyle of seniors and people with disabilities and the limitations that some people have in terms of what they can afford.
Okay, thank you very much. I do have a follow-up question, and that's regarding what you had suggested regarding staff having a conversation or some type of briefing where they could, it's not just a briefing, it's two ways where they can receive input, not just from your committee, but you mentioned other committees. Would you mind going over that again? The Women's Committee, the...
Well, I think that renters, you have a new renters committee, that's the key. Persons with disabilities, a significant portion of older adults are single women, are elderly women, widows. That is a group that perhaps the Women's Committee, if their interest is broad enough to reach to an older population, that they might also be interested.
Thank you. And so what I'm hearing you say is to make an informed decision, you'd certainly need more information, and you're here on behalf of your committee to let us know that you don't have that information to make an informed decision.
Exactly. And I would suggest that as the chair of the committee at the moment, and as the former chair of the Housing Committee, this subject didn't come to us in that specific a way. We did receive a briefing, but I would say it was a 3-mile high briefing looking down on the zoning and the boundaries and things, but it did not get down to the specific of, oh, by the way, we happen to be planning to change the definition.
Okay, and just one last question. As you do chair the Housing Committee, as you had mentioned, and I know from my time as a Park Board liaison to the Seniors Committee that the Seniors Committee, there certainly is a lot of concern over the cost of housing in Vancouver. In what Councillor Carr said about the Hills limits, and some of those limits are $850, which don't meet the limits of the Canadian Pension Plan, or is that something that you're also concerned about?
Absolutely. My father was a war veteran. I would be absolutely remiss if I did not ensure that whatever standards were made took into account somebody who fought in World War II and is on a veteran's pension that is out of the control of everyone else and might be at an unlivable rate if you were trying to live in Vancouver.
And sorry, just one last follow-up while I have 1 minute left here, is do you feel that the $800 to $850 could be unattainable for some seniors under the housing income limit set out by BC Housing?
I think it's possible. And that's why I don't want to make a yes or no answer, because we don't have the details.
Thank you so much.
Okay, I've got Councillor Carr next. Questions?
Mr. Mayor, thanks so much, Ms. McGuinness, for coming and for all your work as a volunteer. It's very much appreciated. If this was a normal report at council, there could be a referral to put the report back into staff hands for further consultation and discussions. But this is a public hearing, and there's no opportunity to do a referral. There's only a support or reject, i.e. a vote yes or no on it. So if you are asking that the Seniors Committee has more time to have and more information made available to have an informed discussion about this, are you asking us to reject this at this point in time?
I pondered that as I was writing my notes, because I know that there are critical issues and there is building, there is housing for people who are vulnerable at stake at the moment. So I don't necessarily want to say, do not go forward. However, I worry that if the definition is accepted, and if the definition after examination and discussion proves to be flawed, then I don't know the process in terms of how you would amend it. So, but I think we wanted to just go on record as saying we were deeply concerned. If it couldn't be deferred, then we would have to say that we, in principle, did not support the new definition, and just leave it as being on the record to say we have a flag saying, we have a concern.
Okay, okay, I'll take that point down. And the report does cover other amendments to the downtown official development plan. Did the Seniors Committee discuss any of the other? Just this particular one. All right, I understand. First meeting. First meeting. Yes. Okay, thank you very much.
And Councillor Ball, questions?
Councillors have asked the questions I had. Thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you, Ms. McGuinness. That's all your questions. Thanks for being here on behalf of the Seniors Advisory Committee. And our first speaker on the citizen speaker list is Noy Leksinski, and followed by Jean Swanson and Joan Seidel. Welcome.
Hi, hello. My name is Noy Leksinski. Sorry, does this start over? This is my first time at a public hearing, so be gentle. All right, there we go. So my name is Noy Leksinski, and I live in downtown South. I strongly felt I had to speak out against the proposed changes to the Downtown Official Development Plan, and I urge Mayor and City Council to vote against these amendments. I attended the public open house and spoke with many city officials who repeatedly said these changes were to help build more social housing. But the change in this definition actually hinders social housing development and allows for abuse of this broad definition. So this new definition, as I understand it, requires that only 30% of units in a given building be set aside for social housing. This means that regardless of the remaining rents of 70% of the other units, all units will count as social housing. So correct me if I'm wrong, if we have a building of 100 units in which 30 is social housing and 70 is market rate, then the building is said to contain 100 social housing units. This is purposely misleading, and it's just bad math. So in the case of Jubilee House at 508 Homkin, the neighborhood was told that the density was to allow for more social housing to be built, when in fact it was only replacing the existing 87 units. The other 75 units are low end of market rate. Meanwhile, the developer is allowed to build an additional 488 market units. So out of the 650 units of this land swap project, only 87 will actually be social housing. So this is a clear example of how this proposed change to the definition of social housing actually fails social housing and allows for abuse. The neighborhood also loses. When members of the neighborhood spoke out against the bonus density, they were accused of NIMBYism and being against social housing in their area, when really the neighborhood was against a massive tower that didn't fit the neighborhood. At the public open house for these proposed changes, I was made to feel like a NIMBYist for even asking questions. The city is using social housing to stop public outcry against their practices of allowing developers unlimited density for projects that don't actually give back enough to social housing or the neighborhood. This leads me to another concerning issue regarding the proposed amendments, and correct me if I'm wrong again, it seems that section 3.13 allows the Development Permit Board to permit an unlimited increase in density of any development that includes social housing. I asked several times at the open house and was told by city planners that if it's to be beyond the allowable SFR, the DP would have to go receive city council approval, but where is the open house and public hearing and the time for public consultation? Yesterday, I received the development application notice for 1099 Richards, in which the proposed building will be FSR 7.0 above the allowable FSR 5.0. Why is this not going to rezoning application notice? Allowing the development permit board the authority to award density bonus, even with city council approval, removes the requirement of a public hearing and public consultation. Any change in FSR beyond allowable limits should be considered a rezoning and require public input. Additionally, a lot of this information is really convoluted, and I only found last night a report entitled Miscellaneous Amendments, in which sections 2, 3, 6, and 7 seems to be about changing the Director of Planning and the Development Permits Board's duties to authorities. According to the report, the proposed revised language provides the authority to enforce the bylaw without requiring its enforcement in all cases as a duty. As I read it, this would have given the Director of Planning the ability to ignore the court's ruling in the 1099 and 508 Helmkin manner and allowed construction to continue. Unelected officials should not be given the flexibility to decide in which cases they will follow the law. Mayor and Council, there's a lot of misinformation in these proposed changes, and it is your duty to vote no. It's not your authority to decide which information you want to bury deep in miscellaneous documents and which stakeholders you want to listen to. Rather than trying to make changes to try to satisfy legal issues to push through a project that doesn't support social housing or the neighborhood, staff should reach out to local social housing advocates and key neighborhood representatives to really draft a plan that encourages more social and affordable housing while maintaining the character and livability of our neighborhoods. I'm highly concerned that we have an additional 10 to 15 developments like this on the go. We have to densify and create more social housing stock. We're aware of that, but we need densification that makes sense. If we're really committed to it, we need to go back to the neighborhood plans and work with the residents. We can't rush to tear down existing social housing stock without a concrete plan to build more that fits the neighborhood. Mayor Robertson, you called for 5,000 units of social housing to be added by 2021. This new definition of social housing allows you to consider market rental rates in that number. It is bad math and an outright lie. So all of you should really check your moral compass and vote no against these proposed amendments. Thank you.
Councillor Carr, questions?
Yes, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thank you very much for your passionate first-time speech here.
Thank you.
So just to go back to where you started, and you said that if there's a building of 100 units, 30% could be social housing, the rest could be market rental, and it would all be called social housing. So let me just be clear about that. 30%, sorry, a third of it could be renting at up to the maximum of the Hills rate, which right now is $850 a month. Oh, thank you, Jean. $912 a month, so a third of it. The other 2/3 could be renting at market rate, and all of it would be called social housing.
That's my interpretation of it, yes. And that's what I'm asking for confirmation on.
Yes.
Is specifically in the 1099 project. I mean, I looked through that report, and it says that 87 will be social housing, and the other ones are low end of market. But we're just going to consider it all social housing. And in the media, everyone is reporting that we're building 162 more. But if you look at the size of those units, and I won't get into tiny units right now, but for a unit about 300 square feet, renting for $11.50, that is not social housing. It's actually very highly profitable micro condos.
Okay, the definition that was in place of low-cost housing, which identified who the housing would be available for. And there's a list that's in this report, including veterans and seniors and people on disability and fixed income. Would that be a preferable definition of social housing or housing to you?
You know what, from my point of view, the issue, I mean, I think that social housing should definitely encompass, the variety of, war veterans, the different people on welfare, et cetera. But the most concerning part for me about this definition is that it allows market rentals to be considered social housing. You're propping up the numbers. So for the staff in revisiting the definition of social housing, it shouldn't be, rental that comprises 30% social housing. It is just the number of social housing that actually exists. That is that needs to be made clear.
Okay, I get that point exactly. So it should be, the social housing should be 100% of that type of social housing. So I'm asking the question, that type of housing, social housing, 100% of it, should it be, or in your mind, would you prefer the definition to say it's 100% of housing that is the way the low-cost housing defined it, for people who are on fixed income, limited income, low.
To me, I guess if I had to define a social housing, what I would say is social housing is bullet point, housing according to the Hills rate, housing for war veterans, et cetera, et cetera. It shouldn't just be, 30% of this and owned by this. It should just be the different type of people that qualify for social housing.
They are on social assistance?
Yes. Or social assistance like war veterans, et cetera.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Questions from Councillor DeGenova?
It's actually a follow-up to Councillor Carr's question, just regarding your thoughts on the sort of definition here. So right now, many of these groups, because I had gone through and researched, and I have for other projects too. Many persons with disabilities receive, I believe it's $375 to $425 a month. So obviously they're not going to meet that $850. So where would you think that the other $425 should come from? Do you feel that it would be unattainable for somebody who is given $375 for shelter? Do you think that they would be able to meet that
I
limit?
don't think it would be. I don't think it would be attainable, and that's why I think that the definition of social housing should really be reworked. I mean, the staff. We can't just pass this through and see what happens, because even though staff is saying that often, they'll see better than that. I'm not sure that I believe that, because right now, according to this definition, and especially in the case of the proposed 1099 project, I don't see it as 100% social housing.
Okay, thank you.
And Councillor Meggs, questions?
Sosinski, so in a project where the market rental was required to produce revenue to support the existence of social housing units, you would separate them from definitions, so that even though they're part of an economic plan for that housing project, you would say only the subsidized units are social housing.
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Well, I think many of these housing projects are working on the basis that there's no federal or provincial programs to subsidize the rates.
Yes.
So the market units produce a surplus within the operation to subsidize the rents of the social housing units that you would agree are social housing. What should we call the others? I mean, the project is a unitary project, so what I'm struggling with here is, what should we do in that?
Right?
Yeah,
No,
I mean,
so
it seems like a very common sense thing. You would produce market rental at some levels to support the cheaper ones, because there's no programs to do so otherwise.
So I absolutely agree with that. So, it's a shame that, BC, so the provincial and the federal government have pulled out, and that, it rests upon the municipality now to provide these units. And I think that density bonuses to allow for social housing and, to subsidize that, I think it works. But I think right now how it works in how you planned it is that you're saying that, if they build at least 30%, then, they can have this much. Rather than I think what we should just do is separate it out, define social housing as, up to Hills rate for war veterans, for welfare rate, et cetera, and then in another bylaw just say, if somebody is building something, then, the social housing that they're providing needs to be at least a minimum of 30%, and then later divided into what type of housing needs to be in that social housing.
It seems, so you'd have two definitions, but the outcome on the street and in the building would be the same. In other words, you'd have a single building, and you would define 70% of the units, to take your example, as not social housing, but they would be part of the overall consideration to produce the 30% that are social housing.
Truthfully, this entire DODP has been completely out of my scope. And, as somebody, just a general resident, I mean, for me, I have a university education, and, I had to spend so much time going through all of this, and I wasn't able to understand it. I feel bad for all the people out there who don't even have my level of education. They have no chance to give an input because they can't even read it. So with that, I would say that I don't know what the answer is. I just know that I see things happening in my neighborhood that really seem to, allow developers to make more profits in neighborhoods and people in social housing to lose out.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, that's all your questions. Thanks for being here to speak tonight. And our next speaker is Jean Swanson.
Yeah, same thing.
Hi, everybody.
Good evening.
First of all, I'd like to acknowledge that we're on the unceded territory of the Coast Salish people, the Tsleil-Waututh, Musqueam, and Squamish, and thank them for allowing us to be here. I'm representing the Carnegie Community Action Project, and I want to talk about the definition of social housing. The staff report is proposing to change the definition that explicitly includes low-income people and even names the sources of their low income, with a definition that will exclude these same people from the new social housing that developers provide in exchange for density. The language of the report is Orwellian. It claims that the reason for the change is the outdatedness of the old definition. To deal with its outdatedness, you need a simple amendment changing the words guaranteed available income for need to social assistance. To replace the low-income definition with HILS, which I just checked again this morning, and it's not $850 a month, it's $912 a month. HILS allows rents of $912 a month for a bachelor unit, is to exclude the very people that the old definition explicitly included, because they can't begin to pay $912 for rent. As you hopefully know, a person on disability only gets $906 for everything, $6 less than HILS allows for rents. A person on straight social assistance only gets $610, about $300 less. People in these groups have $375 for rent. While it's conceivable, as Abby said, that units could be rented for less than the HILS limit, given the finances of the new projects, it's extremely unlikely unless you put it into the bylaw and the definition with teeth, as you did for the downtown east side. Another problem with the new definition is that only 30% of the units are required even to be at HILS. In the old definition, low-income people had to be able to afford the units, all of them. According to the 2009 Social Indicators report from the city, 26.6% of Vancouver residents have low incomes. You're completely abandoning all of these people with this new definition of social housing. You will recall that the Downtown East Side Local Area Plan called for 3,000 Downtown East Side low-income residents to be moved to other parts of the city. This definition will ensure that there's no place for them to move to. Abby was saying that there's no income requirement in the old definition. Yes, that's true. But by identifying the source of incomes, the old definition speaks to the amount that people can afford. Social housing used to have a purpose, to house low-income people. With this definition, we might get social housing, but we lose the old purpose. Noe was right. It's plumping up the numbers of social housing with this definition, and it's an abuse of a definition. To fix the problem, you need a similar definition. Similar to what BC Housing uses. All the units should be accessible to low-income people paying the welfare shelter portion or 30% of their income. And I hope one of you will make a motion to that effect and that the rest of you will vote for it. I have another issue too, and that is an area where it would be good to fix the law to be more transparent. And that is who actually provides the housing that developers ostensibly provide when they get extra density. Last month, I was shocked to find out the condo developers who had to include social housing in their buildings to get extra density were actually selling this social housing to a nonprofit. So now I'm wondering, when a developer gets extra density, what is he actually providing? When the developer at 955 East Hastings says it's providing 70 units of social housing, is it actually providing them, or is it building them and finding someone else to pay for them? Are developers providing an actual unit of housing, or do they merely have to find someone to buy the unit at the highest price possible? It seems to me there should be some transparency about this so the general public knows. And this is relevant to social housing that we're supposed to be getting in exchange for extra density. The public needs to know that low-income people can actually afford to rent social housing, and that developers that are allegedly providing it in exchange for increased density are actually providing it. How's that for timing?
Okay, thank you. You have Councillor Carr with first of questions.
Mr. Mayor, thanks, Ms. Swanson, and for all your work. Would you prefer that the language include specifically the sources of income, or just be more simple, the welfare rate, or at 30% of income? I'm a bit confused about that.
Well, we were talking about this in our group, and we were thinking that all units, if you had a definition that said that all units to be accessible to low-income people who are paying the welfare shelter rate, it would mean that you wouldn't be excluded because that's all you could afford. But if you had a few more people, or if those people, for instance, got jobs, they wouldn't be kicked out. They could pay 30% of their income. Like at BC Housing, I saw the figures for Stamps Place. About 77% of the people there were on welfare or pension or disability, and the rest were probably mostly working. So, I mean, I don't have any problem with that kind of mix.
Okay, so if that definition changed, and it did become the definition, the implication for all the planning that's being done out there would be that currently, if it were to replace the definition of social housing, which says 30% is at, social, whatever the percentage of social housing is, only 30% is at maximum Hills rate, right? Unless you're in an area like, parts of the downtown east side. In terms of the implications for policy, would you be okay if the definition was changed to become a more true reflection of the need, but the target percentage in a building ended up being lower? Because right now, it's only a third of what the units are.
Somebody's got to do something, right?
Yeah.
We're going to release our CAP housing report tomorrow that talks about, we've had to invent a new category. SROs are renting for over $700 when you don't even have a bathroom or a kitchen. And why are people homeless? They're getting gentrified out. So, maybe if you told these developers, you can't have everything you want unless you put in lots of social housing, they would come with you and go to the feds in the province and say, look, we want a decent social housing program. Put a little pressure on them. If you can't do it alone, put some pressure on them. Say you can't make all these profits on all these condos that no one can afford unless you help people at the other end, even if that's by building the housing, sure, but by lobbying. There's a real problem with building condos and building market rental. It pushes up rents in all the surrounding areas, so it hurts low-income people.
Yeah, I do think that there's efforts going on around lobbying.
So what we need here, though, is an amendment to, a really specific amendment could be like the one in the downtown east side, 30% at welfare, or what would be better would be a higher percentage, 50% or 70% at welfare or pension rate. That's what we need in this particular case.
Okay, that's different than what I thought you were saying.
Well, it's a little bit different. If you want it, it's simpler though. If you want to wrap your brain around it, you can do that. Or you could say You could say that all units should be accessible to low-income people paying the welfare shelter portion or 30% of their income.
Right. Okay, so there's two different things here. One's the definition, and one's the policy that applies the definition. So how much of a housing development would be at market versus social housing? That's different than the actual definition. So my question to you that I started with, and I'll repeat it, is do you want the definition to be very clearly specifying that it is at welfare rate or at 30% of income?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, that's all your questions. Thank you very much for being here again. And our third speaker is Joan Seidel, followed by Peter Elliott and then Karen Shaughnessy.
Thank
Welcome.
you. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you. My name is Joan Seidel, and I'm the president of the 127 Society for Housing. We're a nonprofit that owns and operates 3 social housing, I'll use that loosely in my amateur way, buildings in the downtown South neighborhood. One of them, the now unfortunately famous Jubilee House. I'm here to urge you today to affirm the city's and your commitment to social and to rental housing and to preserving the diverse character of Vancouver's downtown by approving the proposed amendments to the Downtown Official Development Plan. In particular, these amendments will support the tenants in the present Jubilee House, who are mostly elderly, disabled, and disadvantaged. Most have made their homes in the downtown South since at least 1986, while not objecting to the 37-plus high-rise condo towers that have grown up around them. The current Jubilee House is deteriorating and needs to be replaced with safe, affordable housing in the same neighborhood that Jubilee's residents have made their home for nearly 30 years. And people like the Jubilee residents live in all parts of the downtown. I'm deeply concerned not only about Jubilee, but about the other proposed social housing projects in the downtown area, many of which, like Jubilee, have been stalled since the court's recent decision. Vancouver needs these projects, and it needs the diversity of housing options that they will provide. It's clear that we're not going to get any more social housing anytime soon by simply waiting on the federal government. And the provincial government has provided support for only a limited number of new proposals. For something like us, a replacement project, completely unsexy, nobody wants to touch it. Through these amendments to the Downtown Development Plan, Vancouver takes the initiative on social housing without needing to put taxpayers' money on the table. The city can creatively leverage city-owned lands and use density bonusing to encourage developers to put up the cash for social housing. I do not want to live in a Vancouver that has a downtown that's been economically cleansed with the poor and low-income people who've historically made their homes there made to vanish. Please support these amendments so that the stalled social housing projects and additional new social housing projects can go forward.
Okay, thank you very much. You've got Councillor DeGenova with questions.
This evening, and I think that the question that I'm going to ask you is similar to some of the other questions I've asked tonight, because it's nice to have a number of different opinions on that. And that would be, I understand that you're here in support of this and that you'd like the social housing to move forward. However, I'm just wondering if you've had an opportunity to see the change in the definition of social housing.
Yes, I have had an opportunity to see it. This definition does not apply to all of the existing projects that we've already got, which are usually have very particular definitions that have been negotiated with the federal or the provincial level of government. This definition, as I understand it, will apply to new social housing projects that want to make use of this density bonusing in some form. And we know that there isn't any subsidies forthcoming from the province or the feds to help with new social housing. So if we're going to house our 87 tenants in a decent way, we're going to have to somehow make enough money to do that. And that's what the 1/3, 2/3 helps us do. We've calculated the numbers, we've crunched them a zillion times, and we think that we can just about do it with low end of market for the 2/3 and the 1/3. Yeah, well, it's not actually one. It doesn't actually work that way for us because we're doing more than 1/3, like Abby said. But anyway, this nonprofits need a way to do this. We can't just snap our fingers and the feds are going to give us the subsidies. I wish they would. It's not happening.
I understand. Another question that I have is, I'm guessing that, and perhaps you can clarify this for me, that many of the people that you represent or are here to speak for receive that shelter allowance of $375
That's right.
a month.
And for many, that's a level that they pay at.
And I'm just wondering if your organization or the people that you're here to speak for, do they receive a rent supplement from BC Housing?
In Jubilee House, no. Do they? Here, let me get our administrator who knows the numbers better than me.
24 people.
Yeah, out of the 87.
Okay, and
then also some receive the SAFER supplement as seniors. So I mean, it's a mixed match. This is an old CMHC project that the CMHC kind of abandoned.
Okay.
So we've been trying to kind of hold it together for all these years.
I suppose in general, the question I'm asking, and I think that this is one of the things that is so difficult in trying to understand the new definition. I find that as we try and be progressive, we try and make definitions more clear, and this makes the definition more general. Would you be concerned that without defining, as Councillor Carr mentioned earlier, persons with disabilities, veterans, and having that language in there, that perhaps the rent supplements that BC Housing understands, this person receives $375 a month for their shelter allowance under their CPP or this or that, or that perhaps those rent supplements could be in jeopardy because of this new Hills limit?
I would say first of all, I would say please don't start identifying people by different types, or I mean, because you're going to miss people out. I mean, there's the AIDS people, right? They're all different ages. And there's other groups where I just don't think we want to start saying you got to be a veteran or you got to be this or that, because our world is going to evolve and we're going to need to house different kinds of people over time. So that aside, then and then your other question is?
My question was just regarding rent supplements. If you felt without those definitions, which also includes the overall disability pension, which encompasses a number of people, that rent supplements would be in jeopardy.
We don't feel. We think that 1/3 of income will do it. 1/3 of income will work for our people. You know, they're in a variety of situations, but that we should be able to make that work.
Thank you so much.
Right. Thank you.
Any questions from Councillor Carr?
Yes, thank you. Thanks very much for coming and for operating, you know, a really important project, and more than one in the city. So I'm just clarifying. The last point you made, you said that within the whole of the project, you think you can make it work if the stipulation was the rent would be 1/3 of income. There would be a variety.
Not within the whole of the project, within the social housing component, which for us, I mean, in the proposed Jubilee House, it's 87 units.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So for the, so would it matter to you if your whole project was called a social housing project, but the number of social housing units would be 30%. So the actual social housing would be 30%. The rest would be market housing. The whole thing could be called a social housing project. But if it was clear that the 30% of the units would be available for people who are either on social assistance or at 1/3 of their rent.
Right. Well, our goal is that if we get in there and we have our low end of market rental units, which would be 75, we're hoping that we'll get in there and find that, oh, look, we can do it with 73 low end of market rentals. We can take 2 of these and treat these at the social housing level. So in other words, we don't want to be locked in because our goal is to house as many low-income people as possible. And we will do everything we can to make that happen. So obviously, if we can move some of that low end of market rental into social housing over time, we will try to do it. The way we've crunched the numbers right now, we think we need the 75. But, you know, you never know what subsidy might come down the road in the future. We've been through so many different variations of government programs over the years. You know, your head would spin.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for being here. That's all your questions. And our next speaker is Peter Elliott, the Dean and Rector of Christ Church Cathedral.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of council, for this opportunity to speak to you. It's kind of my city of Vancouver today. I was out, like some of you were, on the homeless count this morning. Was teamed up with 3 university students, social work students from UBC. And we were given, amongst other places, Victory Square. Went up to one gentleman and asked, sitting in Victory Square, asked if he was paying rent for an apartment. He proudly said yes, he was, and went on to talk about how much the city of Vancouver has actually helped him secure housing. If I'd had a tape recorder there, I think council members and you, Mr. Mayor, would be happy to hear that the efforts of city staff to secure housing for at least this one individual and so many more are appreciated. And that's, you know, when it comes down to it, that's the urgency of the situation that we have today. I'm here to speak in favor of the proposed amendments. I speak to you on behalf of a church community that has a long history of supporting social housing in Vancouver's downtown south neighborhood, quite specifically, as evidenced by cathedral parishioners' roles in founding and governing the 127 Society for Housing since 1981. We've been involved in this for a long time in this neighborhood. The Society currently houses some 250 low-income individuals. In addition, Christ Church Cathedral financially supports social housing through a sizable grant to the 127 Society. Our annual general meeting, just at the end of February, passed a resolution for the extension of social housing in Vancouver, including quite specifically the completion of New Jubilee House. We know that in the pricey Vancouver, the need is increasing for low-income housing in the downtown area. We see it ourselves, this need daily, in the number of people that are being fed at Christ Church Cathedral on a daily basis. Over 125 on one day last week, on Thursday last week. And we experience these issues among our own parishioners as we age and find ways to live on modest fixed incomes in a city of skyrocketing housing prices. Amending the downtown official development plan lays crucial groundwork for achieving more and better housing for low-income residents in the downtown. At a time when no money for social housing is coming from the federal government and limited money is coming from the province. And I know there are lobbying efforts underway, and I will pledge to you, Mr. Mayor, members of council, that our fervent prayers daily will be that the lobbying efforts that you are currently engaging in with provincial and federal governments will come soon to actually provide money. But what is being proposed creates a way to leverage city assets and use private sector money to create additional social housing. Specifically, the Development Permit Board, with council's approval, will be authorized to add height and density to projects that offer social housing as a community benefit. I recognize and applaud Vancouver City Council's tradition of speaking and acting on behalf of the most vulnerable amongst us, one of whom I actually met this morning who appreciates the efforts. On behalf of Christchurch Cathedral community, I urge you once again to act in compassionate service to the poor and the poorly housed by supporting these amendments. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
All right, thank you very much. No questions from Council. Thank you for being here to speak. Our next speaker is Karen O'Shaughnessy. And she's followed by Britta Fluvog, Gary Jarvis, Isabel Minty. Welcome.
Mayor and Council, I'm here speaking to you as an individual, a resident of the community, a lifelong passionate developer of housing, and somebody who's worked with people on low fixed incomes for a lifelong time, particularly in the downtown east side, but also around the region. I'm here to speak in support of the recommendations with one proviso, and that is to add language to improve the definition of social housing, which is the focus of my presentation. And I'm very happy to have heard Council comments on this. With the exception of the downtown east side specified areas, the proposed new definition of social housing means that a development can be considered social housing even if 70% of their units are rental at any price, when the other 30% of the units are rent restricted, even if 100% of those units are on the higher end of the housing income limit scale. The result will exclude people who have the lowest incomes and the fewest housing options from accessing these rent-restricted social housing units. That is, to me, a totally unacceptable definition of social housing and contrary to the whole notion of social housing. You, Mayor and Council, have provided leadership in addressing homelessness and affordability. Having rent-restricted units within the rental market housing throughout the city is a good thing. Having housing agreements on market rental and social housing is a good thing. Density bonusing works. It is primarily the federal government's abdication of responsibility towards the national housing program and their lack of funding of affordable housing that has seriously contributed to the housing crisis that we're experiencing today. There is simply not enough affordable housing to meet the needs of our population. In this environment, to continue to create new social housing, the strategy for market rental housing to subsidize the rent-restricted units and projects is good, thereby making those units affordable, i.e. social housing. However, my experience tells me that unless there is a requirement for at least some of those units being rent restricted to the maximum of the shelter rate of income assistance, the people who are most in need will not be able to afford social housing under this definition. People who are on low fixed incomes, such as seniors, the handicapped, those on income assistance, will be excluded from the new social housing under the new definition because, for example, for a one-bedroom unit, the income of eligible renters is up to $40,000, which is 3 to 4 times greater than most people on fixed incomes receive. The rents will correspondingly be higher as a consequence, excluding the poorest. There is nothing in the new definition that prevents 100% of all the new social housing units renting based on that example of $40,000 income, resulting in all new social housing units being unaffordable to people who are most impoverished, the people who have the fewest housing options and whose housing needs are as great as the low-income earners. To ensure future social housing meets the needs of those living on low fixed incomes as well as those low-income earners, I recommend that the definition of social housing be expanded to state that 30% of social housing in each project must include 30% of units at deep core needs, e.g. for people who are on those low fixed incomes, such as the pensioners and income assistance recipients. If 30% of the social housing units are required to be rent restricted to the income assistance rates, then people on low fixed incomes will have certainty for access to those social housing units along with those of low income. It would also help to ensure that each community has a diversity of people living in their area, specifically in this case, people with a diversity of income levels. And this builds an inclusive community. I recognize that 30% may be considered difficult to obtain, but unless there are benchmarks established, the results of the proposed language will be that all those on lowest fixed incomes in other words, those with the most housing challenges, could be excluded from all social housing. I do believe that this 30% is a financially viable strategy. It is the role of government to ensure that the needs of those who are most vulnerable are met. I am hoping that my recommendation for adding language to that effect will be supported by Mayor and Council and add fairness as well as clarity and certainty, both of which were the focus of the recent court ruling. This language is included already in the Downtown Eastside Community Plan, so could be consistently applied throughout the city. Thank you for hearing me today.
All right, thank you. And you have questions from Councillor Carr.
Good to see you, and thanks for all your...
Good to see all of you.
In terms of your definition, I want to be clear. Are you saying that you accept that social housing could include the 2/3 market rental, but the third that is not market rental, you'd like to see, instead of it say at the maximum hills rate, at the deep core need or welfare shelter rate?
I guess what I'm saying is I recognize, because of developed housing, I recognize the financial constraints and the pressures that we have, particularly right now without any subsidies coming in. So what I'm proposing is that the market units continue to subsidize the social housing units. But within the social housing units, you have, which is the 30%, that you have of them, 30% that are set at the welfare rates, and you have the 70% in that envelope at a scale that can include people at shelter rate, but going up to the hills.
Okay, so it's similar to what Ms. Swanson earlier stated, except for I think she framed it as at 30% of income, which is different than at a scale up to maximum of hills. But otherwise they're similar? Because she started off by saying the goal should be that all of that, what you're calling social housing, or the 30% that we all, that is for people on limited income. Of that 30%, you're saying 1/3 of that should be at shelter rate, and the rest up to the maximum of hills.
Yes, and the 30% I totally agree with. The 30% of people's incomes.
And you agree with that?
Yes,
that notion?
Absolutely.
Okay. Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, that is all your questions. Thanks for being here. Good to see you back at council again. And Britta Fluvog is our next speaker, followed by Gary Jarvis.
Hi, I'm a second-generation Vancouverite. I've lived here all my life, and I'm a little bit concerned about this definition of social housing. I live in Mount Pleasant, so this new hill percentage actually reflects the average cost of housing in my neighborhood. And Mount Pleasant, as we know, we're kind of already in it, is not like a low-income neighborhood. It's not low run of the barrel. It's actually pretty average. So how can social housing contain what is average? Yes, it's not the most expensive, but it's certainly not the cheapest. It's just average. So how can that be social housing? If you're going to want to update and relook, I'd go a hashtag not particularly social housing. How can your definition of social housing not be social? I mean, if you are making a minimum wage, you actually can't afford the hill rate. How is that social housing? Like, absolutely no, under no term and no terminology would anyone go, actually, yeah, that's social housing. Oh, well, they make minimum wage, but you know, social housing is for people who make more money. How is that possible? I urge you guys not to pass this. I feel for the projects that can't go through right now, but I feel more for all the projects after that. Yes, we're stalled on, and yes, we need social housing projects, but if we pass through something fast to make the projects that are stalled now go through, it means every single buddy in the future generation is now under duress and their housing is much more problematic, and probably there's going to be more people who are homeless because of it. And I would urge you to do 2/3 social housing, 1/3 at welfare rate and social income, 1/3 at 30% of people's income, because that is what people would recognize as social housing. And you can have 1/3 in there. Don't call a single one of the units social housing. They are market rental, and it then is mixed housing, but it would help support the low-income housing.
Okay, thank you. No questions from council. Thank you for being here. And next speaker is Gary Jarvis. Is Gary Jarvis here? Gary Jarvis, not here. Isabel Minty is next on the queue. And she's followed by William O'Brien, and Brian Stewart.
Mayor.
Good evening.
Councilors, thank you for this opportunity to speak on this important issue. I am opposed to this amendment to the Downtown Official Development Plan. Near the end of last year's civic election campaign, Mr. Mayor, you made a mea culpa comment saying you would be listening more and hearing citizens' concerns and advice more if they would be forgiving enough to you and re-elect you and vision. You would then have that opportunity. Well, you were re-elected in November, and you have that opportunity now and for the next 4 years. Now, you and your vision councilors are in support of this amendment and are encouraging its acceptance. This amendment will permit developers to proceed without public participation or council approval in some areas of the city. In other words, an open sesame. Don't have to listen to the public, don't have to be concerned that every T is crossed and every I is dotted. It's pretty obvious with which segment of the public you are prepared to listen and hear. The developers. This amendment makes their desires your command. The public's concerns and the need for their participation at a public hearing are of no consequence. They are eliminated. For example, when a developer will include a number of secured market rental units in a development, he will be allowed to double the building size, whatever area the zoning is permitting at that time. When a developer will include one third of the total units as social housing, rabbit hutch, or micro unit, that will allow him, the developer, will be rewarded with the removal of density limits with no public input required. Now, I don't think many of you want to live in a rabbit hutch or a micro unit, but that is considered okay for many Vancouver residents. And as was pointed out by one of the speakers, when you have enough of those, it's not low amount of money that the developer is taking in, because the units are so small, the rent so high, that he's doing better than supplying a decent sized 2-bedroom unit and charging much more. And as has been pointed out, the rental command of these rabbit hutches will still be $8.50 a month. I mean, that is like an outrage, something that is giving a signal to people, we don't want you here, we don't want you in this city, and we're going to make it totally unaffordable for you to be here. An average income earner in Vancouver, a median income earner, can barely afford to live in one of these units, demanding just over $10,000 per year. No person on social assistance could ever afford that kind of money. With this amendment, livable downtown neighborhoods will be changed for the worse, with massive towers in their midst. This amendment's alibi to provide affordability for low-income citizens for housing guarantees they will be the losers if this council approves this amendment. Livable, beautiful Vancouver has been disappearing since the Gordon Campbell era and will now hear its death knell with this amendment. What a betrayal of the Vancouver electorate.
Okay, you have questions from Councillor Carr.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Ms. Minty, thank you for a lifetime of activism. I want to just clarify that when this item was referred to this public hearing, I asked questions of staff to make it very clear that this was a real public hearing so that all councillors are totally aware that their minds are open on the decision to be made. They're open to listening to the people who come here and the examination of the information that they receive both in the report and from staff and from the public. So just to be clear, that was clarified and very much verified as
Thank
the case
you,
by our...
Carr.
Yes.
But I do know many citizens reached you not in this public evening, but prior to this, so that their comments are also under consideration. But I also noticed how this council voted, the Vision Council members, on issue 1 and issue 2. And I'm leaving this situation here, having no doubt that it will be the same for item 3. And unfortunately, this is the problem. This council feels the citizens are in the way of their action, and they have lived by this. And so far this evening, I have not seen a change. I'm sorry about that, Councillor Carr.
Ms. Minty, if you could have a vote on this particular item, what would you want that vote to be? Or if you could see a change, what would you want that change to be in this particular proposal?
Well, I would like social assistance suites to be livable. I would want them to be available to people in need. But I also recognize that the feds and the provincial government are not doing their share. So I recognize the city is in a real bind, and I appreciate that problem. But I also recognize, because we have moved so fast, so far in unaffordability in this city that we're not kind of coming to grips with the reality that every citizen who lives here has to come to grips with every day of their lives. They're up against it, most of them, and it's not reasonable. It's not right for the 21st century that that's the way things are. And we do know high-rise apartments, high-rise condos are no place to bring up families. They have to be low-rise. The ideal, of course, was just shoved aside. The beautiful marine gardens, nothing was felt, with no responsibility to look after that so that it could be existing elsewhere. So every opportunity to do better is somehow, well, we just can't do anything about it.
Okay, you're the first speaker tonight who's mentioned micro dwellings. So can I gather from what you've said that you would not want to see micro dwellings as a permitted use?
Well, would you want to live in that kind of space?
Not me,
No.
but I think some people
Nobody
do.
does.
Yeah.
It's not reasonable. It's not especially reasonable for people who have difficulties.
Okay.
If anything, there's places should be better.
Okay, and thank you for that response. And in terms of the other comment you made, livable to people in need, there's others who have talked tonight about they've tried to find words to define people in need. Can you be more specific as to what people in need means? Does that mean to you people on social assistance or?
Well, I would say low-income people.
Right.
Up against it, and I would say that is a need when you have to work very hard, probably a lot harder than a lot of the rest of the people,
Yeah.
and earn very little return in way of money. And I know it's impossible to change things, but if you don't start turning things around, they'll never change. You've got 4 years. All of you councillors will be here, everything being okay. And you've got 4 years to do something that people will feel that we all are in the same boat. We live in Vancouver, a beautiful place, and let's make it nice for everybody. I don't know how we can pretend life is hellish for a lot of people living in Vancouver.
Thank you.
Okay, you have questions from Councillor Stevenson. Ms. Minty? Councillor Stevenson.
Thank you very much. Thank you for coming in once again, and I know how strongly you feel about these issues, having listened to you over the years. However, I just wanted to ask you about one of your statements. You said that the province and the federal government are not doing their share. I would think it's stronger than that. In my opinion, the federal government is not doing anything at all, and the province is doing very little, and the provincial welfare rates are appalling and haven't been touched for years in any meaningful sense. So the problem for us is it just all comes and lands on our front door, as you're undoubtedly aware. Would that be fair to say that they're not, it's not that, it's not that they're not doing very much, they're not doing anything?
Well, I think you are aware that there's a new move to privatize a lot of the BC public housing.
Yeah, it's worse
that
even.
Will soon be lost too. They're playing the same game to get washing their hands of
any responsibility.
But the other side of that coin is, as one of the speakers said, there's got to be some pressure on the developers. Wasn't that long ago that if a developer got a densification, the responsibility was on him to provide stuff. Now they are rewarded for providing units that are social housing. Like it's been turned around, that the opportunity for them to be a developer comes with a onus on them to put something in the pot too. And we've
That's
lost that.
that's a larger conversation, but the one other small point I wanted to take issue with you obviously are a generation where people had single-family homes, they had lovely backyards, they had dogs, kids could run and play, there were woods, all that kind of thing. I live in a high-rise development now, and there are 4 families, separate families living in my high-rise. Well, two of them have 2 children and one each, and they love it. And that's what they can afford. They can't afford unless they go out of the city. And they love the amenities. We're close to Stanley Park. We're close to the beach. We're close to shopping. And they tell me they pinch themselves that they're able to live in downtown and with such amenities. So I don't think everybody feels it's not a place to raise children. I think lots of people do feel now that they love to have. And the West End, has more, we've had to produce more schools because of the number of children.
You have a question, Councillor Stevenson? You get in a debate, but
Well, I would just
wanna
like
urge-
to make a comment to
Yeah, please.
Mr. Stevenson. My mother had a saying, she came from Maritimes, they have a saying for everything.
Your mother, you said?
My mother.
Yeah.
You can get used to anything except hanging.
Well, I don't think they feel that's a hanging.
Okay, Councillor DeGenova, do you have questions for?
I had a question for Ms. Minty, but she's gone. Thank you so much for taking the time to come out this evening, Ms. Minty. I just had some questions, and my first question is one that I've asked others tonight. Is it concerning to you, because we've heard from some that they prefer a more general definition that doesn't necessarily list the vulnerable groups that should be included here? Do you feel that it's important to have that sort of overarching general view of social housing, or should we make sure that we're including these vulnerable groups such as veterans, persons with disabilities, people on disability, etc.?
Well, I'm with the person who said you shouldn't prioritize. It should be looked at as a big picture, and the vulnerability is very broad. So I would not emphasize anybody in real need, whether through whatever happenstance, should be eligible if they need help.
Okay. And then just a follow-up question to something that Councillor Stevenson asked before. I'm of that generation where it's difficult to perhaps aspire to have the amount of space that prior generations had. I think that many people aspire to that. Most of my friends have moved out of the city of Vancouver, and I go and visit them in Surrey and Langley. I'm just wondering, you were talking about the difficulty with micro units. Do you have any ideas on what you would feel an acceptable size of unit would be?
Well, I would think it would depend on who's occupying it.
If it was a
single
single
person could maybe get by with 600 square feet, but if you got a child, you see, this is what we all get used to. I say a bad word, but I won't. And this is where we're at. We're like providing, and the saying that is sufficient. It's not to be a human being to have that oppressed little cramped quarter. Anyway, that's the way I feel about it. And maybe it's unattainable. Yeah. But I think, as I say, you've got 4 years. Maybe we could start moving somewhere along that line, that it's unacceptable to accept rabbit hutches and micro units and call that fit for human habitation.
Thank you.
Okay, that's all your questions. And our next speaker, I'm just going to actually check in on the time here. We are on speaker number 10 now. It's 9:15, so we've got less than 45 minutes left. Almost 9:20, it looks like. So I would expect we will not get through the rest of the speakers tonight. In addition to that, we have questions and discussion, debate, and decision on this item. So it's virtually inevitable we would be going until over to the Thursday night meeting, which is 6 o'clock Thursday night. And for us to break at 10, that means 40 minutes, leaving maybe 5 minutes at the end for council to, actually we could skip that. Council could give their questions by email to staff, and they could start the next meeting with that. But 40 minutes at the pace that we're going right now, that's probably 4 or 5 more speakers. Just to give everyone a sense of that. That'll gets us to speaker number 15 or 16, somewhere in that range tonight. So why don't we call it? We'll go to speaker number 15, and then that leaves about 10 speakers plus any more who wanted to speak to this item, and the rest of the process and around discussion, decision, debate, all the rest of that for Thursday starting at 6 p.m. So that's rather than going into the very wee hours tonight and trying to finish this, we'll stick with that approach tonight, I think, given what we have in front of us. So we'll go now to speaker number 10, that's William O'Brien, followed by Brian Stewart.
Hello again, Mayor and Council. I'm a longtime resident of the Canby area. However, I'd like to speak to the implications of this proposal on not only downtown area, but the rest of the city. First point would be, I have here, and I'm going to quote from briefly, the Ministry of Community, Sport and Cultural Development, a guide called Community Amenity Contributions, Balancing Community Planning, Public Benefits, and Housing Affordability, issued March 2014. On page 1, it cites, while CACs are the focus of this guide, most recommended principles and practices apply equally to CAC and density bonus approaches. Footnote 1, page 1, where a site-specific rezoning includes a density bonus on condition of providing amenities, it is essentially a rezoning with CACs. Footnote 3, while the City of Vancouver is unique in that it operates under the Vancouver Charter, the issues and guidance of this document are nevertheless applicable to the City of Vancouver. Page 3 refers to some definitions of which social housing is not there. There is interesting definitions of affordable housing and affordable market housing. Come back to that if you wish to talk about it. Page 6. Under public interest considerations, second last paragraph, it reads, if the council or regional board wishes applicants, developers to contribute amenities or provide affordable housing, it should either amend its zoning bylaw to include density bonus options with specified contributions as a condition of higher density, or prepare to negotiate such contributions when rezoning applications are put forward. My brackets, public hearing. Page 9 refers to, under official community plans and zoning bylaws, the last paragraph, it says, to maintain public confidence in the planning process, it is critical that councils and regional boards see zoning as a regulatory tool and a means to implement an OCP. It is vital that councils, regional boards not focus on rezoning as a revenue source and lose sight of long-term planning. Councils, regional boards must avoid the perception that they are no longer planning, but simply selling zoning. I'd be happy to pass this along if it's available to recover, if anybody wants to read it. It's available from the ministry. Second point is the Development Permit Board and the Development Permit Advisory Board being seemingly awarded density bonusing powers is of concern, not just in the downtown area, but I think throughout the city. I've tried to review it. I've talked to people about the nexus of the Development Permit Board and how far it should be allowed to go, and that is an area of deep concern. Third point is we've had, just in the last little while, 2 discussions of market rental housing CAC funds being provided for density bonuses. Is it possible under this plan where in the Marpole case, Marine Gardens, the request to have the $10 million assigned for market rental housing in the Marpole area was declined, instead specified for the general city use, whereas Little Mountain adjacent area, that was designated for the Little Mountain area. Is it possible under the downtown east side where the Development Permit Board may grant density for market housing in combination with some social housing, and yet the benefit would be given in cash, and that cash not assigned to the downtown area? It's not clear that that isn't possible here. Finally, the presentation boards at the library and still on the website and in the report if I had a copy are somewhat confusing, if not very confusing. I refer you to, under the new definition of social housing, it runs through A, B, C, D, and then it has a long cutout after D, which is really carving out Victoria Square area and whatnot. And it gets to the end of that cutout and it calls except, and then it goes on to section E, which implies that E is a continuation of a definition of social housing under the new criteria, when in fact it's a continuation. This is complicated, but it's incorrect and it's confusing. The other problem here in the boards is there's a reference to a new definition of secured market rental housing, but there is no presentation of the old definition of secured market rental housing. I don't think that's fair. The final confusion in the boards is the statement that density under this proposal allowed would have to go to council if it goes beyond some criteria. But it doesn't say to a public hearing. Again, very confusing and not fair. So the first point, quickly, is the ministry has been advised of this, and how far that comments they may have, I don't know, or when that may come, but I'm just bringing that forth. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much for being here to speak. No questions from council. And we're on to Brian Stewart. Speaker number 11, Brian Stewart. Is Brian Stewart here? Not here. John Yano is coming down. Speaker number 13. He's followed by speaker number 14, Garth Mullins and Fraser Doak. Did Gary Jarvis make it here? We passed him by earlier. Mr. Yano, welcome.
Good evening, members of the community, mayor, council, and staff. I'm here to speak in opposition to the proposed amendments. I am deeply concerned that when we are changing the definition of social housing drastically from what the public perception of social housing is to something where 70% of how something that we would define as social housing could be market rental and whatever that might be, and a 30% of the housing would be at what many would perceive to be far above what would be truly affordable for a vast majority of the residents of the downtown. We should be looking at providing housing for the residents of this city, not what some people somewhere could afford to pay in the city. We have an obligation to provide for housing for the residents of the city. Housing is a human right that we are abdicating all levels of government, and it seems evident that City Council is abdicating that obligation to provide for the human rights of its residents by suggesting that the Hills rate of $912.50 a month could possibly be social housing. People on income assistance, seniors, there should be a census of who is in this city and what they can afford, and then we must be willing to provide for the deep core needs as well as the spectrum of needs of the residents of this city. And this cannot in any way be responsible to put forward an amendment to our downtown official development plan that says that 912.50 is somehow social housing, and only that and that 70% of the units would be quite conceivably massively beyond that. I am deeply offended that City Council is considering this, and I'm puzzled that they think that the city would accept this. Like, obviously there are deep problems in our city, but we have to look at creatively to find solutions, and this is creative, but it's not finding affordable housing for the residents of the city, the vast spectrum of the residents of the city. And we have seen the loss of SROs and other things in the downtown core, and this does nothing to address the complexity of what our downtown core is. It is a simplification of and gentrification. It seems that it's trying to exclude people from the mosaic and complexity that is our city, and I think Council should be truly ashamed for putting it forward. Thank you.
Okay, next speaker is Garth Mullins. Garth Mullins here. Saw him earlier, but okay, is Fraser Doak here? Fraser Doak is next speaker, and we still do have time. Dunes is who's registered speaker number 16, and then Jennifer O'Keefe. Welcome, Mr. Doak.
Hello. Good portion of people know me, and I live in a co-op for the last 20 years, and as you know, the federal government has axed the co-ops, passed it on to the provincials, and the provincials have basically passed on a lot of the housing issues to you, and you have done a half-decent job, not the greatest job, I have to say, but I do support that you at least try to do some work. But there is some things that I find kind of hard on some of the language. When you're saying 30% of the building will be social housing, the 30% of the people that are going to be in social housing should also be that it's 30% of their income, which is housing cost. Nothing about that. I live in a co-op and my housing cost is over 60%. Because basically I had to figure out my own portable subsidy because no one else could. The federal government could, the provincial government could, and the civics couldn't. So I figured out a way of doing some work for people, and instead of them paying me, they pay a housing society which pays for my housing. And that's basically like McLaren Housing, Juniper Housing and stuff like that. There has to be, when there's any amendments made in a big program of, i.e. the West End and downtown area, there has to be consequences that you should always look into that could be affecting a lot of people. And a lot of the, a lot of the co-ops are coming to a total axe with their subsidy programs. So a lot more people are going to be in a lot more crisis situation coming up very, very soon within the next 4 or 5 years. And so I really think you should be doing more proactiveness on social responsibility, since the two present governments, provincially and federally, have basically say a polite FU to a lot of people. And I would really appreciate if you guys step up and take action and get people moving on.
Okay, thank you for being here to speak this evening. Our next speaker is Dunes. Here comes someone running down the hall. All right, welcome.
Hello, Mr. Mayor and Council. Well, I'm here to speak about Victory Park. Nobody's saying anything about Robson. I've been in the Victory Park area for 30 years. When I first came to Vancouver, it was the place to be. It was all vintage. It had small businesses, great people. It was a great community. But by 2000, when I opened my little shop underneath the backpackers, it was in decline, and the drugs went all the way up to the bay. And when Woodward's went down, it was like I was on the edge of a broken tooth. The city has already densified my area. So within shouting distance of my shop, we do have the Park Hotel has been redone. The Marble Arch is upgraded. We have Covenant House. There's Salvation Army. And there's an elderly place across the street and rehab. And in the particular block that we're in on Pender is an original block. It's short, it's small. But when a crackhead burned down the ballroom behind our building, Coast Mental Health came in, and it's all mental and crack and drug people. They all broke into our places pretty soon, and thank goodness they've settled down by now. But my little block is already stuffed with a lot of social housing. But what I see that we will lose with more dense and height is that we will lose four floors of parking at Pender and Richards, probably the 4 floors of parking at Cambie and Pender. The quaint Smiley restaurant has been knowing it's going to go down. We're going to lose our peace of mind in our neighborhood because of all the construction and big trucks on our little cobbled streets. I don't want to lose the view of the mountains till we can't see the horizon. But I listen to a lot of tourists, and there's very few and far between places to shop that are unique in my area. Our area doesn't need another hair salon or another bank or another Subway. You know, it's just too much. There's not enough consideration of small businesses. And the old buildings are where the small businesses are. So tall buildings with social housing still don't provide any shops for the tourists. So they just kind of wander around aimlessly and try to find things. I serve the youth around me, and my city has become either for the very rich or the very poor. And a lot of the young people would dream to have a shop like mine, but I don't think it's going to happen in Vancouver. So the tourists want unique. I want to keep my neighborhood beautiful. So lest we forget that 100 years ago they took down a beautiful Victorian building to make Victory Park and to make a public space and to retain our history in our small area. So I don't know if I oppose or want anything from you other than that if you're going to build a building, please build it beautifully and maybe reflect of what Victory Park is and was.
Okay, thank you. No questions for you. And we're next up with Jennifer O'Keefe, speaker number 17.
To
begin, I shall take this opportunity to remind everyone that the present mayor and his fellow Vision councillors are here as a result of an election that was considerably tainted by numerous violations of the Elections Act, most notably in suppression of advanced polling stations for the lower income residents on the downtown
Ms.
east
O'Keefe?
side. Congratulations.
Ms.
When I
O'Keefe,
addressed the council last fall,
Ms.
I
O'Keefe,
brought
could
to
I have
your
your attention,
attention that
please?
there had been
Ms. O'Keefe, the chair, Ms. O'Keefe, your microphone is not on. Just as a reminder, I need to have your attention for a second, please. I'm just going to caution you on alleging breaches of the Elections Act. That's an allegation that is not proven, and just want to caution you on making those kind of allegations or assertions in council here. Thank you.
years ago, which furnished the city the wherewithal to force slumlord owners to meet minimum health standards, thus no need for any new bylaws. Although if one factors in campaign contributions made by many owners of hotels, a motive for avoiding enforcement of existing bylaws becomes comprehensible. The present mayor and his fellow councillors have previously engaged in redefining what homelessness is and isn't. They are now attempting to redefine low-cost housing. The CCAP states, the city is proposing to change to its downtown official development plan, including changing the definition of social housing. A staff report calls for a change to the requirement for low-income housing in new developments. In a report to council, city staff plan to replace a requirement that developers provide low-income housing for extra density with a definition of social housing that will completely exclude low-income people. The report will replace low-cost housing with housing that costs $915 a month. The report's $912. The report says their definition of low-cost housing is outdated because it defines who the homes will be designed for, i.e. for persons receiving war veterans allowance, Canadian Pension Commission, disability pension, guaranteed income supplement, spouse's allowance, or income for guaranteed annual income for need. Staff say it is a term which has been frequently used nowadays. The proposed new definition, they claim, is updated and reflects modern-day practice. However, the report neglects to say the new definition, which is 1/3 of the units at Hills, $912.50 for a bachelor, completely excludes all the people listed in the low-income definition because they can't afford $912.50 a month for rent. If it were really a matter of dealing with outdatedness, the city simply could amend the low-income definition, changing guaranteed available income for need to social assistance. The proposed new definition of social housing will exclude low-income people. In other words, a policy that used to help low-income people won't help them anymore. The city is completely abandoning low-income people with this new definition. The city's 2009 social indicators report, page 71, says 26.6% of city residents have low incomes. This is nothing more than engaging in semantic sleight of hand, using language to effectively further disempower those of lower income, and the present mayor and his vision councillors should be ashamed of themselves for attempting to absolve themselves of their moral, ethical, and legal duty, namely to act in the best interests of the citizens, to vigorously enforce bylaws, forcing slumlords to adhere to health standards, and to do all in their power to furnish housing for everyone rather than seeking ways to avoid doing what they legally swore to do by cheap tricks such as redefining homelessness or affordable housing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for being here tonight and addressing council. The next speaker is speaker number 18, Fern Jeffries.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Council.
Good evening.
I'm speaking here. Can't hear me? That's unusual. Is that okay? I'm speaking here tonight on behalf of the Falls Creek Residents Association because we believe that the issues before Council today impact all neighborhoods in Vancouver. I'm going to raise two issues in my brief remarks. First, the need for open democratic accountability and decision-making around density bonusing. And secondly, the importance of accommodating deep core need residents in social housing across the city. First, I want to thank Mr. McNaney for his comments at the beginning of the hearing. It was the first glimmer I had of beginning to understand the process around density bonusing. I did not understand from the written material whether decisions on density bonuses are made by elected officials or by public servants, or if by both, in what order are these decisions made? Is it proposed that council look at decisions made by public servants only after significant time, money, and energy has been spent planning for the increased density, or before? Will there be a public hearing or not? I urge you not to compromise the importance of elected officials making the first decisions about whether or not to grant density bonusing, and that this decision be made after hearing from the public in a public hearing. I have spoken in the past of the appearance of conflict of interest when developers donate huge sums of money to candidates. Having the public service make decisions around lucrative density bonusing raises the same level of suspicion and possible abuse. We know that many city staff members later turn up as highly paid consultants for or employees of developers. Have their previous favorable decisions put them in line for such lucrative contracts? We wonder. In my view, the city must ensure its policies and practices protect its staff from suspicions of abuse or corruption.
Councillor Deal, point of order.
Make accusations about staff. They cannot speak for themselves, and I don't find that conscionable in this type of a setting.
Thanks, Councillor Deal. I just caution the speaker on making those kind of allegations.
I did not make any allegation. I simply
motives of our staff.
reported on past history.
Well, you're impugning our staff here, and
No,
not
I'm
in a
not.
position to speak for themselves.
What
as
I'm
Councillor
asking
Deal
this council to do is to protect its staff from any possible suspicion.
said. Just going to caution you on making comments that
I am cautioned. Thank you. I do think density bonuses are serious businesses. Density bonuses exempt developers from zoning that was approved after public hearings, approved by elected officials, according to the provisions of the Vancouver Charter. The whole scheme of accountability will be undermined if you allow density bonuses to be granted in private by anonymous public officials rather than upfront as part of a public and accountable democratic process. Second, I want to say a few words about the definition of social housing. This revamped definition forever takes developers off the hook for building housing for income assistance recipients. This revamped definition ensures that the downtown east side will continue to be the only place in the city for people on welfare to live. This is bad social policy. The FCRA believes that there is significant evidence showing that strategies such as scattered site housing and inclusive mixed income developments have better results than high density enclaves of high need, high risk, high impact individuals. The FCRA wants to see social housing across the city, and social housing defined in the traditional way. For example, as the term was used when the Harcourt government launched Homes BC. Social housing included a third of housing for people at the shelter allowance rate, a third housing with rents geared to income, RGI at Hills Limit, and a third housing for people who can pay rents at low end of market. Market rental housing is not social housing. There's no evidence that increasing the supply of market rentals decreases the number of residents requiring assistance with affordability. In summary, changing the definition of social housing calls for a citywide debate. To do otherwise is, in my view, showing serious contempt for the recent Supreme Court decision.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Carr, you have questions?
Yes, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Ms. Jeffries. And as I've said to others, for all your community work, I know that you put in considerable time. Thank you. Two questions to you. One is around the statements that you've made in regards to not letting anyone but elected officials make decisions around density bonusing. So in this report, on page 8, it talks about the fact that there was a need to explicitly state the need for council to make a decision about density bonusing to avoid any future misunderstanding. So the way it's, I know it's a bit convoluted, so I'm just going to make sure. So in the report itself, the section is in Appendix B, and it says that council approval is required prior to the issuance of a development permit. Is that to your satisfaction?
Well, in what context is council, will there be a public hearing?
If it's from the, I will ask that question, because if it's a development permit board, it's not a public hearing.
Yeah. So I
So
did
you're
find
saying-
that very confusing.
All right, so
Although
I'll
I
ask
was
that question.
grateful for Mr. McNady's explanation earlier, I am still relatively confused.
Okay. All right, good. I'll ask that. And the second has to do with the definition of social housing, which you just said you believe needs to have a citywide discussion.
Mm-hmm.
If that's the case, do you think that that's happened yet?
No.
All right, so is your advice to us to reject this particular set of amendments to the DODP until that process of a citywide debate happens?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Meggs, questions?
Ms. Jeffries, I think I wrote down what you said correctly. You said there's no evidence that market rental reduces the number of people seeking social assistance. Was that right?
No. Let me check.
Okay.
Check against delivery. There is no evidence that increasing the supply of market rentals decreases the number of residents requiring assistance with affordability.
So you don't see rental playing any role in generating housing that's affordable for people at the range of
say
income,
that.
say 20 to 80%?
Didn't say that.
Okay, but there's no
Obviously,
evidence.
low end of market rental or affordable rentals play a huge role.
Right.
But for us to continue to have high-end rentals, I don't think that helps people who are struggling on minimum wage.
So if you recall, I think you were here for Ms. O'Shaughnessy's
Yes.
submission. She likes the structure she sees in the downtown east side, and I think her proposition is that the similar deep core definition should be applied citywide. But my question to you is, do you agree with what I think was her submission, that having market rental in the same project with social housing, as she would have it defined, is a positive way to go and actually produces affordable housing? The model seems to work, doesn't it?
The model that worked under Homes BC was a third deep core need, a third hills, a third low-end market. That was the model that worked there.
You're talking about the Harcourt period now.
That's correct.
That was how long ago?
Oh, almost as ancient as I.
And me too.
Yes.
But I don't see that kind of reality around me. Like, how are we going to produce anything? And we don't have those circumstances anymore.
No, we don't, but we have developers preparing, building turnkey operations. And we didn't have that then. So while we had the BC government building in those days, now we have developers building. And I don't, I don't see the developers, although the city does see at least one developer as a hardship case. Personally, I think that a third is likely manageable. And perhaps you would amend that on a project-by-project basis to be a quarter, or some other combination. What I think is important is the notion that high-end market rentals cannot be defined as social housing.
Okay.
That to me
I
is
get
just...
that, but you don't object to the model that would have market rental in a building subsidizing a share of the units that were social housing?
Absolutely. If that is what is required to make it work, that is what will make it work. as I said, we had many projects that were workable at low end of market.
Okay.
And I would, I'd hate to abandon that particular model.
Did you
because
like
like many other old things, it worked quite well.
Did you like Ms. O'Shaughnessy's suggestion?
I wouldn't necessarily agree with how she worked the percentages, but I think in general we share a commitment to having social housing available across the city and to ensuring that we have inclusive, welcoming communities across the city.
Thank you.
All right, we've got Councillor DeGenova with questions.
Thanks for coming, Ms. Jeffries. And again, thank you for all of the time that you put into this. I know you've come to several meetings. I just have a few questions of clarification. And one of those questions is, how do you feel about omitting the low-cost housing definitions as we currently have them and just rolling them into this new definition of social housing? Can you elaborate a little bit on that? And have you had the opportunity, I'm sure you have, to see the proposed changes to low-cost housing as opposed to social housing now?
Well, as I understand it, the definition for low-cost housing will be eliminated and replaced entirely by this new definition of social housing, which I find quite offensive. That the notion that market rental housing, however high that market might be, is part of a social housing definition. I just find that unacceptable. So I can't answer that question without knowing how those definitions are going to be used.
Do you also feel, and I'll ask you this because of some of your earlier comments and some of the comments of the other speakers, do you also feel that there might be the perception with only the two options of social housing and market housing that people in the situation of social housing may not feel that they could aspire to that next step of low-cost housing as opposed to now it's just social housing or market housing?
That doesn't concern me. As I said, we have had and continue to have great success with the notion of integrated, inclusive developments that include people who are on welfare, with people who are paying RGI, rent guaranteed income maximum 30%, with people paying low end of market. And I think that's a model that has worked.
And my last question would be is, and you had mentioned it earlier, and I just wanted to clarify, and a number of speakers had, do you find it's misleading to call a building, an entire building, social housing if it only has 30% social housing?
I think it's totally misleading.
Thank you.
Okay, we are at just a few minutes before 10 o'clock time. Thank you for coming, Ms. Jeffries. And so we're going to call it there for speakers. We've got 6 o'clock Thursday night as our next backup time, as our backup time for this meeting. So when we'll pick up on the speakers list where we are today, we will start with hearing answers from staff to council questions, though, when we kick off at 6 o'clock on Thursday evening. And I will just remind council of our practice with that. If you can email questions to Mr. McNaney, and that's kevin.mcnaney@vancouver.ca. If you don't have that handy, that's where you can reach him with those questions, and Mr. McNaney can open up on Thursday with responses to those questions. We'll then go into hearing from the balance of our speakers on this item. Right now we are at speaker number 19, Harold Lavender. There were several speakers, 3 speakers that I've tracked here, Gary Jarvis, Brian Stewart, and Garth Mullins, who weren't here when their name was called. They'll have an opportunity to speak, and anyone else who comes on Thursday has an opportunity to speak on item number 3. And from there, it's be up to council with next steps on discussion and debate and decision on this item. So We will need, first of all, a motion to rise from Committee of the Whole. Councillor Stevenson, and all those in favor, any opposed, and that carries. We need a motion to adopt the committee, the report of the committee. Moved by Councillor Stevenson, second by Councillor Jang. All those in favor, any opposed, and that carries. And this public hearing is recessed until Thursday at 6 p.m. Thanks, and thanks everyone for your patience, those who came hoping to speak. We'll look forward to hearing from you on Thursday night.